Let's slow things down. You don't have to listen too closely, just let your mind wander while we talk about something incredibly unimportant. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. In the heart of the Netherlands, where tulips grow like unruly teenagers and windmills spin lazily against a flat landscape, Vincent van Gogh took his first breath in 1853 in Zundert, a town so small and quaint even its name sounds like a sneeze. Vincent wasn't born with a paintbrush in his hand, despite what the romantic legends might have you believe. Nope, he entered the world like the rest of us, crying, confused and utterly ordinary. But of course, ordinary would soon become the one thing Van Gogh could never quite manage to be. Growing up, Vincent was the eldest of 6 siblings, and being the oldest meant one thing: expectations. His father, Theodorus Van Gogh, was a Protestant minister, and his mother, Anna Cabentus, had a knack for drawing that she hoped would rub off on her kids. Spoiler alert, it rubbed off on only one of them, and not in the way she might have imagined. Family life in the Van Gogh household wasn't exactly a 19th century sitcom. Vincent was a sensitive kid, prone to mood swings and introspection, which is a polite way of saying he was a bit of an emotional roller coaster. You know, just your typical future artistic genius in the making. Now, what do you do in the 19th century when you've got a bunch of kids and dreams of grandeur? You send them off to work, naturally. Vincent, at the tender age of 16, found himself packed off to The Hague to work for his uncle's art dealership, Goupil & C. You'd think this would be the perfect match, a young man surrounded by paintings, breathing in the heady scent of varnish and canvas. But alas, it turned out Vincent was as suited to art dealing as a cat is to water. He had the enthusiasm of a Labrador puppy, but the salesmanship of a damp sponge. He was, to put it mildly, a terrible art dealer. Vincent's time in the art dealership business is a comedy of errors that could rival any sitcom. Picture this. There he was, surrounded by art he couldn't sell, largely because he couldn't stop himself from telling potential customers how much he despised the very pieces he was supposed to be hawking. Honesty might be the best policy in life, but it's not great for commissions. After a series of less than stellar performances, Vincent was shipped off to the London branch, where he promptly fell in love with his landlady's daughter. It was unrequited, of course, because this was Vincent van Gogh we're talking about, a man whose love life was as turbulent as a Dutch thunderstorm. Vincent's romantic failings were only overshadowed by his professional ones. By 1876, his career in art dealing was as dead as a dodo. It's unclear whether he quit or was fired, but either way, Vincent found himself back in the Netherlands, unemployed and at a crossroads. Cue the existential crisis. He dabbled briefly with the idea of following in his father's footsteps, considering a career in theology. But 3 months at a seminary in Amsterdam taught him 2 things. He wasn't cut out for academia, and the life of a clergyman wasn't quite the calling he thought it might be. Undeterred, Vincent tried his hand at teaching in England, but his stint as a schoolmaster was short-lived. The kids didn't appreciate his intense lectures on biblical history and art, and Vincent didn't appreciate the kids. It was a mutual agreement of sorts. So, he moved on, like a restless spirit searching for a purpose he couldn't quite grasp. In 1880, after a series of career misadventures that would make even the most patient parents sigh in despair, Vincent finally decided to pursue art seriously. He enrolled in the Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts in Brussels. Now, if you're imagining a young Van Gogh, sketchbook in hand, eagerly absorbing the wisdom of his instructors, think again. Art school was less of a nurturing environment and more of a battlefield. Vincent clashed with his teachers, who found his techniques unorthodox and his colours too vibrant. He was the rebel with a cause, except his cause was often misunderstood and met with skepticism. Despite the rocky start, Vincent was determined. He spent hours studying anatomy and perspective, honing his craft with the kind of intensity that suggests a man on a mission. He devoured the works of great masters and practiced relentlessly, developing a style that was as unique as it was misunderstood. His early works didn't scream future genius to most. Critics might have called them rustic or unsophisticated, but Vincent didn't care. He was painting for himself, and that was enough. So there you have it. From Zundert's sleepy streets to the bustling art scene of Brussels, Vincent van Gogh's early life was a patchwork quilt of failures, unrequited loves, and artistic rebellion. He was a man out of sync with the world around him, driven by an insatiable desire to create, to leave his mark. It's a tale as old as time, but with Vincent it was always told in the most vivid colours. And this was only the beginning of a journey that would eventually see him cut through the noise of mediocrity, one brushstroke at a time. Now, as we leap from the colourful chaos of Vincent's artistic awakening to the infamous incident that has spawned 1 million Halloween costumes, we find ourselves in Arles, France, in 1888. It's here that Vincent's ear would become the most famous lobe in art history. But before we get to the slice and dice, let's set the stage. Picture Vincent in Arles, a town that's more serene than a Zen garden. He's there for the light, the landscape, the inspiration, and perhaps a little for the isolation. At this point, Vincent's artistic style is blossoming like the sunflowers he painted, those radiant yellows and swirling skies that scream passion in every brushstroke. But he's also battling the mental health demons that would haunt him throughout his life. Vincent's mind was a canvas of its own, splattered with chaos and brilliance in equal measure. Enter Paul Gauguin, the brooding, tempestuous artist with whom Vincent hoped to form an artistic utopia. And by utopia, I mean 2 guys in a yellow house, arguing over brush techniques and sipping absinthe like it's water. Gauguin was the cool cat of the art scene, the bad boy with a penchant for exotic locations and bold colours. In Vincent's eyes, Gauguin was the artistic partner who could help him create a new movement, a brother in arms against the stodgy art establishment. But here's the rub. Vincent and Gauguin's relationship was as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. They were like a mismatched pair of socks, colourful but never quite in sync. Vincent's vision of a cooperative artists' colony clashed with Gauguin's desire for independence and adventure. Their debates were legendary, the kind of fiery exchanges that could melt paint off a canvas. Gauguin criticised Vincent's frantic brushwork, while Vincent couldn't understand Gauguin's obsession with symbolism over substance. Now, on to the ear. On December 23, 1888, after one particularly heated argument, Gauguin stormed out, leaving Vincent simmering in a stew of anxiety and absinthe. In a fit of either madness or desperate creativity, historians are still scratching their heads. Vincent took a razor to his own ear. Not the whole ear, mind you, just a part of his left earlobe. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? The myth of Vincent slicing off his entire ear has persisted. Like that annoying song you can't get out of your head. Post-ear incident, Vincent delivered the severed piece to a local brothel, because when you're having a breakdown, why not involve the nearest bordello? This bizarre delivery was reportedly meant for a woman named Rachel, though why he chose her is anyone's guess. Maybe it was a twisted token of affection, or an artistic statement too, avant-garde for its own good. The aftermath of the ear incident was as messy as you'd expect. Vincent was hospitalized, suffering from hallucinations and acute mental distress. This wasn't a one-off episode, it was part of a larger pattern of breakdowns that plagued him. Gauguin, meanwhile, did what any good friend would do. He skipped town, leaving Vincent to fend for himself. Talk about ghosting before it was cool. While Vincent was grappling with his demons, his brother Theo was in Paris, pulling the strings to keep Vincent's life from unravelling completely. Theo was the unsung hero of this saga, the financial lifeline that allowed Vincent to keep painting. He sent money whenever he could, despite having his own struggles, including a new marriage and a baby on the way. Theo's unwavering support was a testament to brotherly love, but it also highlighted Vincent's precarious position. Without Theo, Vincent's artistic endeavours would have been as sustainable as a chocolate teapot. Despite the drama and the dire straits, Vincent's creativity never wavered. His time in Arles produced some of his most iconic works, like The Starry Night and those sunflowers we keep coming back to. But here's the kicker. For all his talent, Vincent sold exactly one painting during his lifetime. One. It was called The Red Vineyard, and it went for 400 francs, about 2,000 euros today. Not exactly rolling in dough, was he? Vincent's financial woes were a constant thorn in his side. While other artists were finding patrons and selling work, he was living on Theo's modest handouts. In letters to his brother, Vincent often expressed his frustration and despair over his lack of commercial success. He was a visionary in a world not quite ready to see. So, there you have it. Vincent van Gogh, the man who turned personal turmoil into timeless art. His ear incident, while sensationalized, was just one chapter in a life marked by passion and pain. And though the world didn't appreciate him then, today we can't get enough of his vibrant canvases and tragic story. But remember, behind the legend was a real person, struggling to find his place in a society that didn't quite know what to do with him. As we move forward in this tale, we'll see how Vincent's story continues to unfold, with more twists and turns than a swirling Van Gogh sky. And so we find Vincent in Arles, the picturesque French town that offered him the light and colour his soul craved, yet also the isolation that gnawed at his fragile psyche. This was the setting for an artistic explosion. A renaissance, if you will, but with more absinthe and fewer frilly shirts. Between February 1888 and May 1889, Van Gogh produced over 200 paintings, a blitz of creativity that's almost hard to fathom. That's nearly a painting every 2 days, folks. Forget Netflix binges. Vincent was on an art binge of epic proportions. Now, let's talk about living conditions. If you're picturing a quaint artist's garret with a view of sun-dappled fields, think again. Vincent's accommodations were, shall we say, less than Instagram-worthy. He lived in the infamous Yellow House, which sounds charming until you realize it was a fixer-upper without the Chip and Joanna Gaines touch. The rent was a mere 15 francs a month, a steal even in those days. But Vincent was perpetually broke, relying on financial lifelines from his brother Theo to keep the roof over his head and the canvases coming. And let's be real, it wasn't just canvas supplies he was spending on. Absinthe and tobacco were as much a part of his artistic toolkit as brushes and paint. Now, here's the kicker. The romanticized image of the tortured artist paints Vincent as a lone genius, but the reality was far less glamorous. His mental health struggles were profound and debilitating. Vincent's letters to Theo reveal a man trapped in a tumultuous mind, swinging between euphoria and despair with alarming speed. In one letter, he described feeling as if he were in a deep, dark abyss. Not exactly the breezy prose of someone casually dabbling in a bit of angst for artistic flair. Yet, in the midst of this turmoil, Vincent's work was nothing short of revolutionary. He painted the world not as it was, but as it felt, vibrant, swirling, alive. Take The Night Cafe, for example. In it, Vincent captured the oppressive heat, the garish glow of gas lamps, and the sense of desolation that can hang over a room like a fog. He described it as a place where one can ruin oneself, go mad, or commit a crime. Cheerful, right? But therein lies the genius. Vincent wasn't just painting a scene, he was painting an experience, an emotion. This period also gave birth to his famous Sunflower series, those joyous bursts of yellow that have become synonymous with Van Gogh himself. But behind their sunny facade lies a deeper story. Sunflowers were more than just a subject. They were a symbol of gratitude to Theo, a token of brotherly love painted in the fiery yellows and oranges that defied the gloom of Vincent's internal world. Despite their beauty, Vincent's sunflowers were often painted on reused canvases, a testament to the financial strain he constantly faced. And here we must pause to debunk another myth, the idea that Vincent was completely unappreciated in his time. It's true he only sold one painting during his lifetime, but he wasn't entirely overlooked. Fellow artists like Toulouse-Lautrec and Émile Bernard recognized his talent, and his work was displayed in exhibitions, albeit not with the fanfare we see today. Vincent's style was simply ahead of its time, a kaleidoscope of emotion and colour that the conservative art circles of the day weren't quite ready to embrace. But let's not romanticize this too much. Vincent's life in Arles was a grind. His artistic output was matched only by his bouts of illness and depression. The winters were harsh, the mistral winds relentless, and his health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from hallucinations and seizures, episodes that would leave him bedridden and unable to paint. It was during these times that the spectre of the tortured artist loomed largest, casting Vincent's real struggles in a romantic shadow that belied their true horror. So why does this narrative persist? Because we love a good story, especially one with a tragic hero. The image of the artist battling inner demons to create masterpieces resonates with our collective imagination. But behind the legend was a man wrestling with very tangible challenges, a lack of funds, deteriorating health, and a society that didn't quite know what to make of his genius. In the spring of 1889, things took a turn for the worse. Vincent's mental health reached a tipping point, culminating in a self-admittance to the Saint-Paul-de-Moselle asylum in nearby Saint-Remy-de-Provence. It was a desperate move, but Vincent knew he needed help. The asylum, a former monastery, offered a temporary refuge from the chaos inside his head. Here he painted The Starry Night, an iconic masterpiece that swirls with the intensity of his inner turmoil, capturing the night sky in a way that has captivated imaginations for over a century. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In Arles, Vincent's artistic flame burned bright, even as his personal life unravelled. His connection to the town was as complex as his paintings, full of passion, contradiction, and an unyielding quest for meaning. Arles was both a muse and a tormentor, feeding the art while starving the artist. It was in this paradoxical environment that Vincent van Gogh forged his legacy, one brushstroke at a time. As we continue to delve into Vincent's life, we'll explore how his time in the asylum shaped his final years and how his story, full of vibrant colours and deep shadows, continued to unfold in ways both inspiring and heartbreaking. Stay tuned for more tales from the life of the man who painted the world in Technicolor long before it was cool. As Vincent settled into the asylum at Saint-Remy, he found himself in a peculiar kind of sanctuary, a place where the walls kept out the chaos but couldn't quite contain the creative storm brewing inside him. It was here, amidst the serene yet sterile corridors of Saint-Paul-de-Moselle, that Vincent painted some of his most hauntingly beautiful works. This was the setting for The Starry Night, a painting that seems to shimmer with the intensity of 1,000 sleepless nights. But let's not get too starry-eyed just yet. The asylum wasn't exactly the artist's retreat you might imagine. Picture more of an early prototype for a mental health facility, a place where treatment involved a mix of rudimentary therapy and a whole lot of prayer. But Vincent, ever the industrious artist, made the best of it. He was given 2 small rooms, one to sleep in and another to paint. This arrangement might sound idyllic, but remember, we're talking about a man whose mental health was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. In between episodes of depression and hallucinations, Vincent produced around 150 paintings during his year-long stay. That's right, 50. Most of us can't even commit to a gym membership for a year. And here was Vincent, churning out masterpieces faster than you can say post-impressionism. His works from this period are vivid and expressive, capturing the essence of the Provençal landscape with a fervour that would make even the most jaded art critic sit up and take notice. One of the standout pieces from his asylum days is Irises, a vibrant explosion of blues and greens that seems to dance right off the canvas. This painting was created within the first week of his arrival, a testament to Vincent's indomitable spirit and relentless drive. But don't be fooled by the beauty of the irises. Behind them lay a man grappling with his inner demons, seeking solace in the strokes of his brush. Now, let's talk economics for a moment. Despite producing a veritable gallery's worth of art, Vincent's financial situation remained as bleak as a Dutch winter. His brother Theo, ever the steadfast supporter, continued to send money and supplies, keeping the artistic wheels turning while shouldering the burden of Vincent's expenses. It was a delicate balancing act, with Theo juggling his own family responsibilities and a career in the volatile world of art dealing. But why was Vincent still struggling financially, you ask? The short answer? Timing. Vincent was a trailblazer, a visionary whose work was simply too avant-garde for the conservative tastes of the late 19th century. Art dealers and collectors were more interested in the tried-and-true realism of the time, leaving little room for Vincent's swirling skies and bold colour palettes. In a world that adored predictability, Vincent was the wild card no one knew how to play. As his health fluctuated, Vincent found a new source of comfort in his correspondence with Dr. Scene, Paul Gaffes, a physician with a penchant for art and a flair for eccentricity. Dr. Gaffes was a bit of an oddball. Imagine a 19th century hipster with a stethoscope. He was passionate about homeopathy and alternative medicine, which might explain why he and Vincent hit it off. The doctor took a keen interest in Vincent's work, offering not just medical advice but also a friendship that would prove invaluable in the artist's final years. In May 1890, Vincent left the asylum and moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, a quaint village north of Paris. It was here that he sought the counsel of Dr. After. Gaffes, hoping to find stability and perhaps a touch of inspiration amid the rolling wheat fields and rural tranquility. Olvers was a picturesque setting, offering Vincent the pastoral beauty he craved, yet it was tinged with an air of melancholy, an atmosphere that would seep into his later works. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony. Vincent van Gogh, a man whose life was a series of unending struggles, found his muse in a place that epitomized peace. Yet the calm was deceptive. His mental health continued to waver, and the spectre of financial ruin loomed large. He was painting furiously, creating over 70 works in just 70 days. A burst of creativity that would be impressive if not for the underlying desperation it masked. Among these paintings was Wheatfield with Crows, a masterpiece that has sparked endless debate among art historians. Is it a reflection of Vincent's troubled mind, a visual representation of his impending doom? Or is it simply a study of nature, capturing the turbulent beauty of a stormy sky over golden fields? The truth, as with most things Vincent, is likely a bit of both. The painting is a symphony of swirling crows and ominous skies, a poignant juxtaposition of life's chaos and beauty. Despite the artistic triumphs, Vincent's financial woes showed no sign of abating. His connection to the art market was tenuous at best, and the commercial success that eluded him in life only added to his frustrations. He felt like a man out of time, his genius recognized by only a select few, while the broader world remained indifferent. In his letters to Theo, Vincent expressed a profound sense of isolation, a feeling of being misunderstood and unappreciated despite his tireless efforts. And so we find Vincent in Olvers, painting like a man possessed, yet haunted by the spectre of his own mind. His interactions with Dr. Gaffes offered some solace, but the underlying currents of despair were never far from the surface. It was a time of both profound creation and profound struggle, a fitting culmination to a life lived on the edge of brilliance and madness. As we leave Vincent in the fields of Olvers, poised on the brink of his final chapter, we're reminded that behind the legend lies a real person, a man who painted the world as he saw it, with all its beauty and brutality. Vincent's story is far from over, and in our next installment we'll delve deeper into the final act of his life, exploring how his legacy was forged amidst the turmoil of his last days. Stay tuned for more tales from the life of the man who dared to see the world in a different light. As we leave Vincent in the fields of Olvers, poised on the brink of his final chapter, it's time to unravel the myth that his genius was instantly recognized the moment he shuffled off this mortal coil. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Vincent van Gogh's posthumous fame was less like a shooting star and more like a slow-burning candle. His paintings didn't immediately fly off the proverbial shelves after he died in July 1890. In fact, they languished in obscurity for years, gathering dust like the forgotten remnants of a misunderstood genius. In the months following his death, Vincent's legacy was largely curated by his brother Theo. Unfortunately, Theo's own health was on a downward spiral, and he passed away just 6 months after Vincent. Cue Johanna van Gogh, Theo's widow, who picked up the mantle with the kind of determination that'd make a bulldog look lazy. Johanna had the foresight to preserve Vincent's paintings and letters, recognizing the goldmine of creativity in her possession. Her efforts to exhibit and promote the works were crucial in laying the groundwork for Vincent's eventual recognition. Without Johanna, we might still be debating whether Vincent was just that guy who cut off part of his ear. Vincent's art began to pop up in exhibitions across Europe, albeit slowly. By 1901, 11 years after his death, a memorial retrospective in Paris featured 71 of his works. This was a significant step, but it wasn't a launchpad to superstardom. The art world is a fickle beast, often more interested in who you know than what you create. Vincent had spent most of his life as an outcast, a painter who was too ahead of his time for the critics who preferred their art safe and predictable. A bit like ordering vanilla ice cream in a world where Vincent was offering habanero chocolate swirl. So why the delay in recognition? Blame it on the economic and social climate of the time. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were periods of immense change, with industrial revolutions shaking up the social order. Art was trying to find its footing amidst this chaos. Realists and Impressionists were still fighting for acceptance, and Vincent's post-Impressionist style was like a cat trying to join a dog show, intriguing but not quite welcome. The world wasn't ready for the raw emotion and vibrant colours that defined Vincent's work, much less the manic energy that leapt off his canvases. It wasn't until the 1920s that Vincent's reputation began to gain real traction, helped along by the growing interest in modern art movements. The Fauves and the Expressionists latched onto his use of colour and emotive style, recognizing in Vincent a kindred spirit who had walked the path they now trod. This new generation of artists hailed him as a pioneer, a visionary who'd painted the world not as it was, but as it felt. Vincent was finally getting the recognition he deserved, albeit from beyond the grave. And then came the market boom. By the time the mid-20th century rolled around, Vincent's paintings had become hot commodities. The irony? The very works that couldn't sell for a pittance during his lifetime were now fetching sums that could buy entire estates. In 1990, exactly a century after his death, Vincent's portrait of Dr. Gaffes sold for a cool $82.5 million at auction. For those keeping track, that's about 206 million francs, or enough to keep Vincent in paint and absinthe for several lifetimes. But why the sky-high prices? In part, it's the allure of the tragic artist narrative. Vincent's story is catnip for collectors who crave not just art, but the stories that come with it. People love a tortured genius, and Vincent's life checks all the boxes: passion, struggle, madness, and unrequited genius. It's the kind of backstory that adds zeros to price tags like nothing else. Beyond the myth, however, lies the real impact of Vincent's work on modern art. His fearless colour palettes and emotional intensity paved the way for movements like Expressionism and Abstract Expressionism. Artists like Matisse and Pollock owed a debt to Vincent's willingness to break the mould, to paint with abandon and emotion rather than precision and restraint. Vincent didn't just paint pictures, he painted experiences, emotions, and the raw energy of life itself. Yet, for all the romanticized tales and multi-million-dollar sales, it's crucial to remember that Vincent van Gogh was a man who lived in a world that didn't quite know what to do with him. His posthumous fame is a testament to the fact that sometimes the world takes a while to catch up with genius. Vincent's story is not just about art, it's about the relentless pursuit of a vision, even when that vision doesn't pay the bills. As we draw the curtain on Vincent's life and legacy, we're left with a man who saw the world in a way few others did. A man whose legacy is painted in the vibrant colours of sunflowers and swirling skies. His impact on art is undeniable, his story a vivid reminder that sometimes the seeds of greatness take time to bloom. Vincent van Gogh may not have lived to see his success, but his work continues to inspire and captivate, a testament to the enduring power of art to transcend time and circumstance. And so, while we can marvel at the millions his paintings command today, let's also remember the man behind the myth, an artist who painted not for fame or fortune, but for the sheer, unyielding love of creation. The sun's barely kissed the horizon, and already the streets of second-century Carthage are alive with the clamour of commerce and the scent of the Mediterranean. But you, my friend, are not here to bask in the aroma of fresh olives or the clink of bronze coins. No, you're waking up to the less glamorous but brutally real role of a domestic slave in this Roman-controlled hub. Your day's about to begin, and spoiler alert, it's not going to be a spa treatment. So, what's the going rate for a human life in this bustling Roman colony? Well, you could be bought for about 2,000 sesterces, give or take. That's roughly the price of a decent mule, though don't expect anyone to tell you you're worth your weight in gold here. The Roman Empire, in all its glory, is propped up by people like you, cheap, expendable labour. A staggering 1/3 of Rome's population is enslaved, and Carthage, a city rebuilt on Rome's terms, is no exception. The economy here is a well-oiled machine, and you're one of the countless cogs that keep it grinding. Forget any romantic notions of the noble slave, that rare yet glorified narrative where a slave rises to prominence or earns their freedom through sheer grit. Sure, it happened, but it's about as rare as a snowstorm in the Sahara. For you, it's a relentless grind. Your day starts before the first rooster crows and doesn't end until the sun dips back below the horizon, and no, you're not getting any paid time off. As you shuffle out of your cramped sleeping quarters, you step into a world that thrives on the whims of your Roman master. The hierarchy here is as rigid as a centurion's spear. You're at the bottom, below the freedman, and way below the patricians who wouldn't deign to acknowledge your existence unless you're serving them wine or scrubbing their feet. It's a world where social mobility is practically non-existent, unless you count the rare occasion when a slave owner decides to free you. But let's be honest, the odds of that happening are about as good as Rome voluntarily giving Carthage its independence back. Your tasks are varied, yet monotonous. One minute you're fetching water from the public fountains, which, by the way, are a marvel of Roman engineering. Let's give them that. The next, you're preparing meals you'll never taste, for banquets you'll never enjoy. And when your master decides to host a gathering, you're the invisible hand that keeps the wine flowing and the guests entertained. It's a life of service, without the luxury of choice. Speaking of choices, let's talk about that stark social hierarchy. The Roman world operates on power dynamics that would make Machiavelli blush. At the top, you've got the emperor and the senators, men of influence who've never lifted a finger unless it was to point at a map or a slave. Below them are the equestrians and the plebeians, the working and middle classes who, despite their own struggles, still look down on you. To add a sprinkle of irony on this social Sunday, there's the ever-present threat of being sold. You could be uprooted and shipped off to another part of the empire on a whim. Maybe your master needs to settle a debt, or perhaps you've fallen out of favour. In that case, you might find yourself in the vibrant markets of Carthage, where traders haggle over your worth like you're just another sack of grain. But let's not get too bogged down with the grim realities. There's something to be said about how the Roman Empire's reliance on slavery is a double-edged sword. Sure, it's an efficient system for them, but it's also a constant reminder of their dependence on those they deem inferior. If every slave decided to stop working tomorrow, the empire would be in chaos faster than you can say Carthago delenda est. So, as you start your day, take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. You're living a reality that fuels the Roman economy while being kept in the shadows of history. But for now, it's time to seize the day, because as harsh as it is, it's the only day you've got. And just like that, your day's off and running, as swift as a Roman chariot at the Circus Maximus. You're tasked with preparing the master's breakfast, which isn't just about tossing some eggs on a skillet. No, this is a journey into the culinary heart of the Roman Empire, with Carthage as your bustling kitchen. First up, bread. Let's talk about the Romans' love affair with grain. Picture this. Carthage is like the Mediterranean's pantry, but with a twist that would make any modern-day locavore cringe. The grain that will become today's breakfast bread likely travelled from Egypt, the empire's breadbasket. Yep, shipped across the Mediterranean. Those grains have seen more of the world than you ever will. This isn't just about feeding the masses. It's about power, control, and making sure the empire's citizens are too full to revolt. Rome imports millions of tons of grain annually, and Carthage is a key player in this well-oiled logistical machine. But let's not forget the olive oil, the liquid gold of the Roman world. The jug you're reaching for probably hails from Hispania, modern-day Spain. Hispania's vast olive groves produce oil that's as essential to Roman cuisine as it is to their economy. Romans drizzled it on everything, from bread to bodies, in a ritual that was part culinary delight, part spa treatment. The trade routes that bring this oil to your master's table are the veins of the empire, pumping wealth and resources through its body with clockwork precision. Now, as you grind the wheat into flour, take a moment to appreciate the irony. The very trade networks that make Rome a global powerhouse also bind you in servitude. It's a world where the same maritime routes that carry luxury goods to the elite also ferry the enslaved across seas, shifting lives like pieces on a game board. Let's sprinkle in some perspective on slave rations. Don't expect a feast. Your daily intake is more about survival than satisfaction. A typical ration for you might include a modicum of bread, some porridge, perhaps a ladle of olive oil if you're lucky, and a token portion of wine. Yes, wine, because even the Romans knew that a little vino can make a hard day slightly less soul-crushing. It's not a Michelin-starred menu, but it keeps you going, and that's all that matters to your masters. In this grand culinary theatre, what you cook isn't just food, it's a symbol of your standing. The master's breakfast, a veritable smorgasbord of imported delights, contrasts sharply with your own meagre rations. It's a reminder that while the Roman Empire is vast, its benefits are as unevenly distributed as the grains in your morning porridge. Now, Let's zoom out to see why all this matters. This intricate web of trade isn't just about feeding a city. It's about feeding an empire's ambition. The wealth flowing into Rome allows it to maintain its armies, build its monuments, and entertain its citizens with games that distract from the inequities of life. Carthage, once a rival of Rome, is now a cog in this imperial machine, its strategic location exploited to feed the beast. And while we're on the topic of myths, let's bust a big one. The romantic vision of Rome as a land of endless feasting is just that, a vision. Sure, the elite might indulge in lavish banquets, but for most, life is less grape-stuffed dormouse and more barley and onions. The disparity between rich and poor, master and slave, is as stark as the difference between your rations and the breakfast you're preparing. So, as you knead the dough and stoke the fire, remember this: the meal you're about to serve is more than sustenance. It's a microcosm of Roman society, a testament to the empire's reach and the social structures that hold it all together. It's a reminder that while you may be at the bottom of the heap, you're an integral part of the empire's story, a story that's as much about survival as it is about glory. As the aroma of fresh bread fills the air, you can almost taste the irony. In feeding the master, you're feeding the empire, and in feeding the empire, you're keeping the machine that enslaves you running. But before you get too philosophical, remember, there's still a breakfast to serve and a day to seize, even if it's not exactly the day you'd choose. And just like that, the breakfast is served, and you're off to the next task, the market run. Marketplaces in 2nd century Carthage are a far cry from your quaint local farmer's market with artisanal cheese samples and organic kale. No, this is a full-throttle hub of commerce and cacophony, where the air is thick with the smell of spices, sweat, and the occasional whiff of salted fish. It's a place where fortunes are made, lost, and bartered over in a chorus of shouting vendors and haggling buyers. As a slave, your role here is practical and straightforward. Fetch what your master needs, and do so without falling into the trap of getting noticed. The irony isn't lost on you. In a place designed for exchange, your very presence is a testament to another kind of transaction, one where you were the goods exchanged. Forget those romantic depictions of slave markets as bustling bazaars of opportunity. In reality, they were grim affairs where human beings were evaluated with the same detached scrutiny as livestock. The market is a swirling tapestry of society's layers. On one hand, you've got the traders and merchants, the lifeblood of Carthage's economy. They're the ones who keep the wheels of commerce turning, dealing in goods that range from North African ivory to the finest silks from the Far East. On the other, you've got slaves like yourself, whose job it is to ensure that these goods make it to the homes of the wealthy without a hitch. It's a well-oiled machine, and you're one of its many interchangeable parts. Now, about those romanticized slave markets. Let's dial it back a notch. It wasn't a scene out of a Hollywood epic. In reality, a slave transaction was more about legal documents and less about dramatic auctions. Sure, the Romans had their fair share of public slave auctions. Think less art gallery opening, more cattle yard. Slaves were sold at markets like these for as little as 500 sesterces to as high as a well-bred racehorse, depending on skills and health. Each sale was a bureaucratic affair, complete with a title deed that stated the slave's skills, origin, and any defects. The Romans were nothing if not thorough. While the romantic notion of a slave market as a place of potential freedom is appealing, the harsh truth is that these markets were more akin to a grim game of chance where the house always won. The odds of buying one's freedom were slim, and for many, the marketplace was just another stage in a life of servitude. As you navigate the bustling stalls, you are acutely aware of the role slaves play in Carthage's economy. You see fellow slaves employed as scribes, artisans, and even teachers. Let's pause there for a moment, because this is where reality throws a curveball. Despite being considered property, some slaves were highly skilled and educated, often more so than their masters. An educated Greek slave, for instance, might be employed as a tutor for Roman children and could fetch a price of up to 10,000 sesterces. That's a small fortune enough to buy a nice villa. Yet, no matter how skilled or educated, a slave remained just that, property. Legal statutes were clear, slaves lacked personhood. They couldn't own property, marry, or testify in court. The law was as cold as a marble statue, unyielding and absolute. In the market, you see artisans, slaves trained in workshops to create intricate mosaics or fine pottery. These slaves might have lived relatively better lives compared to the farm labourers or miners, whose existence was brutal and often short-lived. The skilled artisan could perhaps earn a modicum of respect, but let's not kid ourselves. Respect didn't translate to freedom or equality. Carthage itself was a city rebuilt from the ashes of its own destruction by Rome in 146 BC, a testament to Rome's ability to conquer and assimilate. The city's location was key, a strategic jewel of the Mediterranean, and its markets were the beating heart of this revived metropolis. Here, Roman law and order met the chaotic energy of the North African trade routes, blending cultures and economies in a way that was as volatile as it was vibrant. Walking through the market, you're reminded of the peculiar duality of Roman society, a place where culture and cruelty coexisted, where the grandeur of empire was built on the backs of those it oppressed. Carthage's markets were not just places of commerce, but arenas of power dynamics, where every transaction was a reminder of the social order. As you make your way back to the master's house, laden with goods, you can't help but marvel at the intricate web of commerce and servitude that defines your world. You're a part of a machine that spans the known world, a cog in the grand design of empire. It's a reality as stark as the midday sun, yet as complex as the patterns in a Roman mosaic. But before you get too lost in thought, remember, there's still a day's work ahead, and in the Roman world the sun never sets on duty. As the sun climbs to its zenith, casting long shadows over the bustling streets of Carthage, you find yourself back at the master's house, your morning's market escapade complete. The city buzzes with life, a constant hum of activity that's almost musical, albeit in a cacophonous, off-key sort of way. But as noon approaches, there's a slight shift in tempo. For many, it's time to pause for a meal, a luxury that's more elusive for a slave than a cool breeze in the Sahara. Let's talk about lunch in the Roman world, where social strata dictate not just what you eat, but also when, and if, you get to eat at all. The master and his kin are likely indulging in a spread that could make Dionysus blush, fresh bread, fruits, perhaps a bit of cheese and, of course, wine. Lots of wine. Meanwhile you, if you're lucky, might get a moment to wolf down some leftovers, your own meagre ration of bread, and maybe a sliver of yesterday's fish, if Fortuna's on your side today. Here's where life throws in a dash of irony. The meal break isn't just about sustenance, it's a rare pause in the relentless grind of servitude. Yet, the pause itself is a reminder of your place in the social hierarchy. You know, the Romans had a knack for turning even the most basic human necessity into a display of status. Food wasn't just about eating, it was a marker of social identity, a daily reminder of who was who in the grand scheme of things. Now, before you get too lost in the aromas wafting from the master's table, let's delve into the social dynamics that define your existence. Interaction between slaves and freedmen is a dance as intricate as any Roman mosaic. Freedmen, former slaves who've bought or been granted their freedom, occupy a peculiar niche in society. They're free, yes, but not quite equal to the native-born Romans. It's a bit like being the middle child in a dysfunctional family, always trying to prove your worth but never quite fitting in. Freedmen often become clients to their former masters, entering into a relationship that sounds more like a quirky sitcom than a social contract. The master provides protection and support, while the freedman offers loyalty and labor. It's a system that keeps the wheels of Roman society greased, but don't be fooled, it's less about altruism and more about maintaining the status quo. For slaves, the prospect of joining the ranks of the freedmen represents a flicker of hope, a candle in a windstorm. Manumission, or the act of freeing a slave, could be granted for loyalty, exceptional service, or even as a parting gift in a master's will. But let's not sugarcoat it. The odds of being manumitted are as slim as a toga on a sumo wrestler. The psychological toll of this life is aptly described in letters from Pliny the Younger, that early chronicler of Roman idiosyncrasies. He notes the deep-rooted sense of hopelessness that can pervade a slave's life, a sentiment that's as heavy as a Roman amphora. Sure, there are tales of slaves who rose through the ranks, earning their freedom and even acquiring wealth, but these stories are the exception, not the rule. A tantalizing myth that distracts from the harsh reality of a life spent in chains. Speaking of myths, Let's tackle the idea of the happy slave, a narrative as fictional as the exploits of Hercules. The notion that slaves were content with their lot is a comforting delusion for those in power, not a reflection of reality. The physical toll of servitude is evident in the worn hands and weary eyes of those who toil day in and day out. Slaves worked long hours under harsh conditions, their bodies and dignity sacrificed on the altar of imperial ambition. The Romans, for all their advancements in engineering and law, were experts at cognitive dissonance. They could marvel at the beauty of their aqueducts while ignoring the human cost of building them. It's a bit like admiring the paint job on a car while overlooking the fact that it runs on fumes. In this complex social web, you navigate relationships with fellow slaves and freedmen, sharing whispers of hope and commiseration, the bonds of camaraderie forged in the fires of shared adversity. These interactions, though brief, provide a salve for the soul, a reminder that even in oppression, there's a semblance of community. As the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting a golden hue over the city, you're reminded of the duality of your existence. You're a vital cog in the empire's machine, yet invisible to those who reap its benefits. The meal break is over. The respite was brief, but it was enough to recharge for the tasks that lie ahead. The day marches on, as relentless as a Roman legion on campaign. There are floors to scrub, garments to mend, and a master's whims to cater to. But as you resume your duties, there's a flicker of defiance in your heart, a quiet rebellion against the notion that your life is without worth. It's a reminder that even in the shadow of empire, the human spirit endures, resilient and unyielding. So, as the day stretches into evening, keep that flicker alive. The Roman world is vast, its history grand and complex. And while your story might not be etched in marble or sung by poets, it's nonetheless a part of the tapestry that is Rome, a thread in the grand design that's as crucial as any emperor's decree. And with that, the afternoon melts into evening, and the tasks that define your daily grind beckon once more. But remember, tomorrow is another day, another chapter in this unending saga of survival and service. Your place in history, though uncelebrated, is as real as the stones that pave the streets of Carthage. As evening drapes its shadowy cloak over Carthage, the city's frenetic pace doesn't wholly subside, but transforms into a different rhythm. It's a time when the city's elite prepare for leisure, while the slaves brace themselves for the evening's demands. You, on the other hand, find a moment to ponder the grand machinery of the Roman Empire that runs on the backs of those like you, a system as vast as it is exploitative. Let's dive into the gritty details of this empire built on servitude. At the heart of it all is the legal framework that makes it possible for 1/3 of the population to be enslaved. Roman law was as clear as a perfectly carved marble statue, yet as cold as the stone itself. Slaves were considered res, or things, under property law, devoid of personal rights, but subject to the whims and fancies of their owners. This was a society that saw human beings as assets, no different than cattle or land, and just as disposable. But here's the kicker. The same legal system that stripped slaves of their humanity also contained the seeds of its own unravelling. You see, while slaves were considered property, they could, paradoxically, engage in certain economic activities, like managing their own peculium. This was a kind of allowance or savings account, which some slaves used to buy their freedom. It's a bit like being allowed to rent the chains that bind you, but with the slimmest of keys hidden somewhere in the rusted links. And then there's the Roman penchant for pragmatism. As the empire expanded, it became a melting pot of cultures and ideas. This cultural exchange, call it globalization 1.0 if you will, meant that the concept of slavery began to clash with new philosophies and religions, like Christianity, which preached the spiritual equality of all men. The idea that every soul was equal in the eyes of God was as revolutionary as a Caesar's coup, and it began to seep into Roman consciousness like wine into a sponge. Economic factors played their hand as well. With the empire constantly at war, the supply of new slaves from conquered territories ebbed and flowed like the tides. Meanwhile, the cost of maintaining slaves, feeding, housing, and guarding them began to outweigh the benefits. Enterprising Romans started to see the appeal of a paid labor force, which offered flexibility and, crucially, cost savings. The shift towards a more tenant-based agricultural economy was like watching the slow crumble of a once impregnable wall. Now, let's tackle the myth of the benevolent master, a tale as comforting as it is misleading. Sure, some masters were kinder than others, offering better living conditions or even education. But these stories, like a pleasant dream at dawn, are rare and fleeting. The harsh reality was that most slaves lived under the constant threat of punishment. Roman law allowed for brutal methods of discipline. The whip was not just a tool, but a symbol of control. Yet, within this brutal system, slaves found ways to resist, to assert their humanity in small but significant ways. Acts of rebellion ranged from subtle sabotage to outright revolt. Take the legendary Spartacus, whose rebellion in 73-71 BC shook the very foundations of Roman society. Though ultimately crushed, the revolt was a stark reminder that even the most downtrodden have a breaking point. It's a classic tale of the underdog, and while it ends in tragedy, it's a testament to the indomitable human spirit. As the empire transitioned over the centuries, we see the gradual decline of slavery, much like a fading sunset. By the 4th century AD, a combination of economic, social, and religious pressures had made slavery less central to Roman life. The rise of feudalism in the post-Roman world heralded a new era where serfs replaced slaves. Not quite freedom, but a step toward a slightly less oppressive system. Now, what about the sanitized narratives of history? It's tempting to romanticize the grandeur of Rome while glossing over the grit. After all, who doesn't love a story of architectural marvels and epic battles? But the truth is, the empire's splendor was built on a foundation of suffering. Those aqueducts and amphitheaters didn't spring from the earth, they were hewn from stone by the hands of slaves. The very roads that connected the empire were paved with sweat and subjugation, and this brings us to the legacy of slavery in the Roman Empire. It's a legacy of contradiction and complexity, a tapestry woven with threads of oppression and resilience. Slavery helped shape the economic and social structures of ancient Rome, yet it also sowed the seeds of its own decline. The stories of slaves are not mere footnotes in history, they are integral chapters in the saga of civilization. As you settle in for the night, take a moment to reflect on your place in this grand narrative. The life you lead, though harsh and uncelebrated, is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. In the dark shadows of history, your story is a flicker of light, a reminder that even in the most oppressive systems there exists a potential for change, for hope, and for the quiet, persistent push toward a more just world. So, as the city of Carthage wraps itself in the night's embrace, remember, your story is part of a larger tale, one that continues to be told through the ages. History, with all its grandeur and grime, is nothing without the voices of those who lived it, voices like yours that whisper through the annals of time, echoing the complexities of human existence. Sleep with this knowledge, you are not forgotten, and your days, though hard, contribute to the rich tapestry of life that is Rome. In ancient Athens, the only thing more chaotic than their gods was their political scene. Enter Pericles, the man who would one day wear the crown of Athenian statesmanship with the same flair as his iconic helmet sans the plume, just brains. Born around 495 BC, into a world where democracy was still figuring out which fork to use at the political dinner table, Pericles had the kind of upbringing that screamed Greek elite. His father, Xanthippus, was a victorious general at the Battle of Mycale, and his mother, Agariste, was a member of the politically powerful Alcmaeonid family. Talk about a pedigree that could make even the most ambitious Athenian sit up straighter. Pericles grew up amidst the white marble and political squabbles of Athens, a city that could rival modern soap operas in drama. Athens at the time was a place where you could barely throw a stone without hitting a philosopher, an artist, or someone embroiled in a scandal. Democracy was the buzzword, but in practice it was more like a high-stakes game of musical chairs. The idea was that all male citizens over the age of 18 could participate in the assembly, but with around 30,000 eligible participants, not everyone was getting a turn at the mic. Pericles would soon prove to be someone who could keep the music playing in his favor. But before he could become the big kahuna of Athens, Pericles had to navigate the political labyrinth of his early career. In a society where ambition and treachery were as common as olives and feta, the young Pericles had his work cut out for him. He started his public career around 461 BC, which was a time when Athens was trying to assert its influence in the Greek world. The city was knee-deep in the so-called First Peloponnesian War, a conflict that was less about the noble ideals of democracy and more about who could outmaneuver whom on the Greek chessboard. Athenian politics was a bit like a toga party that had gone off the rails, with alliances and rivalries shifting like sand in a breeze. Pericles aligned himself with the democratic faction, which wasn't just about voting rights and civic duty, but also a strategic move to elbow out the aristocratic families who thought the city belonged to them like a passed-down family heirloom. In 461 BC, Pericles helped ostracize Cimon, a conservative leader who was as popular as a sunburn in the Athenian summer. This move was brilliant in its audacity and ruthlessness, setting the stage for Pericles to gradually increase his influence over Athenian politics. Meanwhile, in the realm of personal life, Pericles was making waves too. His relationship with Aspasia, a woman from Miletus who was as controversial as she was captivating, was the talk of the town. Aspasia was no ordinary woman. She was a metic, a foreigner in Athens, and her intellectual prowess and influence over Pericles were enough to make the Athenian traditionalists clutch their pearls, or whatever the ancient Greek equivalent was. She was rumoured to have a hand in many of Pericles' decisions, which didn't sit well with those who thought that women should be seen and not heard, preferably while weaving in the corner. Aspasia was known for her salon, where the intellectual elite gathered, and she was a close associate of Socrates. Yes, that Socrates, the one who made a career out of asking annoying questions. Pericles' relationship with Aspasia was both a scandal and a testament to his unconventional thinking. While many Athenians were scandalized by Aspasia's influence, Pericles seemed unfazed, valuing her counsel and companionship in a way that was rare in a male-dominated society. Now let's talk about the big picture. Athens, in the 5th century BC, was a superpower in the making, flush with the spoils of the Delian League. A coalition of Greek city-states ostensibly formed to keep the Persian threat at bay. But as the treasury swelled, so did Athens' ambitions. Under Pericles' guidance, the city began to transform into a cultural juggernaut, with grand projects like the Parthenon turning Athens into an architectural showcase. Pericles, with his eye for grandeur and legacy, was the driving force behind these developments, making sure that even the gods would envy the skyline of Athens. Let's not forget that Pericles also had a knack for peace treaties that were about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. The so-called 30 Years' Peace with Sparta, made in 446 BC, was meant to bring stability, but anyone with a crystal ball, or just a bit of cynicism, could see that it was more of a temporary truce. The reality was that Athens and Sparta were like two siblings forced to share a room, with tensions simmering just beneath the surface. Despite the precariousness of the times, Pericles managed to steer Athens through these choppy waters with a combination of strategic acumen and sheer force of personality. His oratory skills were legendary, able to sway the assembly like a maestro conducting a symphony. But let's not kid ourselves, Pericles wasn't a saint. His policies were sometimes heavy-handed, and his insistence on Athenian supremacy rubbed more than a few city-states the wrong way. But in the grand tapestry of history, Pericles stands out as a leader who knew how to play the game, even if the rules were constantly changing. As we wrap up this introduction to Pericles, it's clear that he was a complex figure navigating an even more complex world. His rise to power wasn't just about personal ambition, but also about the broader currents of Athenian society and politics. In a city that worshipped both the gods and the idea of democracy, Pericles managed to carve out a legacy that would endure far beyond his time. And while his life was filled with drama and intrigue, one thing is certain, Pericles was more than just a pretty helmet. He was the maestro of a city that, for a time, stood at the very pinnacle of the ancient world. And speaking of maestros and legacies, let's turn our gaze to Pericles' pièce de résistance, the Parthenon. If Athens was the stage for Pericles' grand performance, then the Parthenon was his magnum opus, the ultimate architectural flex that screamed, "Look what we did, Persia!" But for all its glory, this wasn't just a temple to Athena, it was a multi-million drachma PR campaign. The Parthenon wasn't just an offering to the gods, it was the ancient world's most expensive billboard, a 5th century BC Times Square minus the neon. Constructing this marvel, perched on the Acropolis like a crown jewel in Athens' skyline, was no small feat. The Parthenon was built over 9 years, from 447 to 438 BC, and employed a labour force that would make a modern construction manager break into a cold sweat. Think thousands of craftsmen, labourers and artisans, all working under the watchful eye of Phidias, the Michelangelo of his time, minus the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Now, let's talk numbers, because if you think your rent is high, wait till you hear this. The Parthenon cost an estimated 469 talents, an ancient currency that doesn't convert neatly into dollars, but consider this. A single talent could pay a skilled worker's salary for nearly 20 years. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about a budget that could make even the most hardened treasury official reach for the ouzo. This monumental budget was funded not just by Athens' citizens who were likely grumbling more than a Spartan at an Athenian poetry reading, but also through the coffers of the Delian League. The Delian League. Originally a mutual protection pact against Persia, it had, under Pericles' guidance, morphed into what some might call an Athenian slush fund. The League's treasury, initially kept on the island of Delos, was moved to Athens under Pericles' watch, a move that was about as subtle as a Spartan army on your doorstep. This financial manoeuvring wasn't without controversy. Allies grumbled, and not-so-allies outright fumed, but Pericles was playing a strategic game. He knew that the perception of power was as important as the possession of it. By transforming Athens into a cultural and architectural icon, he was reinforcing its status as a hegemon, a city so splendid that even the gods might want to crash on its couches. But let's not romanticize the Parthenon just yet. While it's easy to get swept up in the grandeur of its Doric columns and intricate friezes, the reality was less glamorous. The Parthenon was a job creator, sure, but it didn't exactly offer a 4011 call. The labour force included everyone from skilled stonemasons to unskilled labourers, with varying degrees of wage fairness, if we can call it that. And here's a fun fact. Slaves were also part of this workforce, a common practice in ancient construction. Not exactly the image of democratic idealism we like to associate with ancient Athens. The political machinations behind the Parthenon's funding were as intricate as its sculptures. Pericles had to navigate a minefield of opposition from those who viewed the project as a colossal waste of resources, money that could have been spent on, say, military defences or public welfare. Critics argued that Pericles was essentially using public funds for his vanity project, a charge that wasn't entirely without merit. But Pericles, ever the orator, sold it as an investment in cultural capital. He argued that the Parthenon would enhance Athens' prestige and attract visitors, much like a modern city bids for the Olympics. Now, let's bust a myth or two. The Parthenon is often hailed as a religious monument, but its purpose was less about piety and more about propaganda. Sure, it housed a massive statue of Athena, but it was also a symbol of Athenian supremacy. It served as a reminder to both allies and enemies that Athens was not just a city-state, but a cultural juggernaut. Think of it as a very expensive, "Don't mess with us" sign in marble. In the end, the Parthenon was as much about politics as it was about religion, a testament to Pericles' ability to blend the two into a seamless narrative of Athenian greatness. This was not just a temple, it was a manifesto carved in stone. Pericles knew that to lead Athens was to craft a legacy that would outlive him, a legacy that would stand as a beacon of Athenian values, even if those values were sometimes more about perception than reality. As we wrap up this chapter on the Parthenon, it's clear that this was more than just an architectural achievement. It was a statement of power and ambition. Pericles understood that the true art of leadership was not just in governing, but in inspiring, in crafting a vision of what Athens could be, even if the path was paved with controversy and conflict. The Parthenon stood as a testament to a city at its zenith, a reminder that while the gods might have watched from Olympus, it was mortals like Pericles who truly shaped the world. But don't get too comfortable in your admiration, because the next part of Pericles' story is a roller coaster of war, politics, and the inevitable clash of ideologies. So, tighten your intellectual seatbelts, because it's about to get turbulent. So, we leave behind the marble grandeur of the Parthenon and dive headfirst into the diplomatic waltz that was Pericles' foreign policy. Picture Athens as the social butterfly of the ancient world, and Pericles as its sharp-suited diplomat, spinning tales and treaties with a finesse that could charm a Spartan out of his sandals. But let's not kid ourselves. Athens' foreign policy under Pericles was less about global harmony and more about Athenian hegemony. It was like a high-stakes game of Risk, where the dice were loaded and the winner took all. At the heart of Pericles' diplomatic strategy was the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states, originally formed in 478 BC to fend off Persian aggression. But under Pericles, the League transformed from a defense pact into a vehicle for Athenian imperialism, with Athens at the wheel and the other city-states relegated to the back seat. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a hostile takeover, but with fewer boardrooms and more triremes. The League's treasury, once kept on the sacred island of Delos, was moved to Athens in 454 BC, ostensibly for safekeeping, but really as a power play. It was a bit like inviting your friends to a potluck and then taking all the dishes home for yourself. The move was controversial, to say the least, and it cemented Athens' dominance over its allies, who were now paying tribute rather than sharing power. The irony, of course, is that this arrangement was justified under the banner of collective security, even as Athens' grip tightened like a noose. Pericles was a master at balancing power with persuasion, using both the carrot and the stick to keep the League in line. When persuasion failed, Athens wasn't shy about flexing its military muscle. Case in point, the revolt of Samos in 440 BC, which Pericles quashed with a forceful demonstration of naval supremacy. It was a clear message to any would-be rebels: defy Athens and you'll find yourself between a trireme and a hard place. But let's not paint Pericles as just a warmonger with a silver tongue. He was also a pragmatist who understood the importance of peace as a strategic tool. In 446 BC, he brokered the 30 Years' Peace with Sparta, a treaty that was less about long-term stability and more about buying time. The peace was as fragile as an Athenian vase, with both sides eyeing each other warily, like cats around a milk bowl. This uneasy truce allowed Athens to consolidate its power without the immediate threat of Spartan aggression, but it also set the stage for future conflicts. Pericles' approach to foreign policy was akin to walking a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. He had to maintain Athens' dominance without provoking open revolt among the city-states or outright war with Sparta. This balancing act was a testament to his diplomatic acumen, but it was also fraught with contradictions. For all his talk of democracy and freedom, Pericles' Athens was an empire in all but name, its power built on the subjugation of its so-called allies. Now, let's take a moment to debunk a popular myth, the idea that Pericles' foreign policy was solely aimed at spreading democracy. While it's tempting to view Athens as the ancient world's beacon of liberty, the reality was more complex. Pericles was less a champion of democracy for its own sake, and more a strategist who used it as a means to an end, namely, the strengthening of Athenian power. In this sense, his diplomacy was less about ideals and more about realpolitik, the cold calculus of power and influence. Economically, the Delian League was a windfall for Athens, which collected tribute from its allies to fund its military and cultural projects. This influx of wealth allowed Athens to flourish, transforming it into a hub of art, philosophy, and commerce. But it also sowed the seeds of resentment among the other Greek city-states, who chafed under Athenian dominance. For all its cultural achievements, Athens was increasingly seen as a bully, its supremacy maintained through coercion and control. So, what does this tell us about Pericles' diplomatic legacy? On one hand, he was a visionary leader who turned Athens into a superpower, using diplomacy as a tool of statecraft to navigate the treacherous waters of Greek politics. On the other hand, his pursuit of Athenian hegemony set in motion the very forces that would eventually lead to Athens' downfall. It's a classic case of hubris overreaching ambition that, while impressive, carries within it the seeds of its own undoing. As we wrap up this chapter on Pericles' diplomatic prowess, it's clear that his story is one of ambition, strategy, and the delicate balance of power. He was a leader who understood that in the Game of Thrones, it's not just about who sits on the chair, but how you manipulate the pieces on the board. Pericles' Athens was a city of contradictions, democratic yet imperial, cultured yet coercive, powerful yet precarious. And as we look ahead to the turbulent times that followed, it's clear that while Pericles may have mastered the art of "it's not you, it's us," the costs of that mastery would soon come due. And just like that, we find ourselves at the brink of one of history's most notorious clashes, the Peloponnesian War. If Athens was the life of the party, Sparta was the bouncer waiting to shut it down. Pericles, with all his charm and strategic finesse, now faced a challenge that would test the very limits of his political genius. The war erupted in 431 BC like a bad sequel no one asked for, but everyone had to watch. The conflict pitted Athens and its empire against the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League, and it was less about ideological differences and more about who was top dog in the Greek world. Let's dive into one of Pericles' boldest strategies, the long walls. These towering fortifications stretched roughly 4 miles, linking Athens to its harbours at Piraeus and Phalerum like umbilical cords of stone. Picture these as ancient Greece's version of a security blanket, designed to keep Athens supplied and secure even if the Spartans came knocking, or rather, battering down the door. The idea was audacious: withdraw the rural population into the city, hunker down behind the walls, and use Athens' superior navy to keep the city fed and watered. It was a bit like trying to win a chess game by only moving your rook. But here's the kicker. While the long walls were a logistical marvel, they were also a massive bet on Athenian naval supremacy. Pericles believed that as long as Athens controlled the sea, the city could withstand any siege. It was a strategy that screamed confidence, or maybe a touch of madness. The walls were meant to turn Athens into an impregnable island, but they also made the city a sitting duck when the Spartan army came tramping through the Attica countryside, burning crops and generally making life unpleasant for anyone caught outside the walls. The reality was that while the walls kept the Spartans out, they also kept the Athenians penned in, a claustrophobic nightmare that would soon have deadly consequences. Let's talk about the economic side of this grand strategy. Maintaining a naval fleet the likes of Athens, capable of outmatching the Spartans at sea, wasn't cheap. It's estimated that Athens had around 300 triremes at its disposal, with a single trireme costing about a talent to build and requiring another talent annually to maintain. That's a hefty price tag, especially when you're also footing the bill for the upkeep of the long walls and the feeding of a city now bursting at the seams. Pericles was gambling on Athenian wealth and naval prowess to outlast Spartan patience, a bit like trying to win a marathon by outspending your opponent. Now, we know hubris had a habit of crashing the party in Greek tragedies, and Pericles was about to learn this the hard way. The confined conditions inside Athens were a breeding ground for disease, and in 430 BC the city was hit by a devastating plague. This wasn't some minor sniffle. It was a full-blown epidemic that killed an estimated 1/3 of the population, including Pericles himself, in 429 BC. The plague swept through Athens with the kind of ruthless efficiency that even the Spartan army would have envied. So here's the gallows humour. Pericles' grand strategy to make Athens unassailable ended up making it a petri dish instead. The irony is almost Shakespearean, if Shakespeare had been writing about Greeks and had a particularly dark sense of humour. The very strategy that was supposed to protect Athens turned into its Achilles' heel, revealing that even the best-laid plans could unravel faster than a toga in a windstorm. With Pericles gone, the Athenian leadership found itself in a precarious position, navigating a war that showed no signs of ending. The city was in disarray, its political stability as fragile as a philosopher's ego. The Spartan army continued its annual raids on the Athenian countryside, like clockwork, while Athens relied increasingly on its navy to strike back. But the loss of Pericles left a leadership vacuum, and the subsequent Athenian leaders were a mixed bag of bravado and incompetence, often more concerned with personal glory than strategic coherence. Economically, the war was draining Athens dry. The tribute from the Delian League was no longer the cash cow it once was, with allies either revolting or being too strapped themselves to pay up. The city's coffers were running low, and the mood in Athens was as dour as a Spartan poetry reading. The war effort required constant funding, and with trade routes disrupted and resources stretched thin, Athens was beginning to feel the pinch. Despite these setbacks, Athens managed to pull off some impressive military feats, thanks largely to its formidable navy. The Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BC saw Athens capturing hundreds of Spartan hoplites, a victory that was as unexpected as it was morale-boosting. But victories like these were the exception rather than the rule, and they often came at a great cost. The war dragged on, becoming a grinding test of endurance that neither side seemed able to decisively win. In the grand scheme of things, the Peloponnesian War was a masterclass in the futility of prolonged conflict, where both sides were locked in a destructive dance that neither could abandon without losing face. It was a war of attrition, and as it ground on, The initial fervor and idealism that had fueled the conflict gave way to exhaustion and disillusionment. So, what's the takeaway from this chapter of Pericles' legacy? It's a reminder that even the greatest leaders can falter when faced with the unpredictable forces of history. Pericles' vision of Athens as an unassailable stronghold was undermined by factors he couldn't control: disease, economic strain, and the relentless pressure of war. His plans, while bold and innovative, ultimately backfired in ways that even his sharp intellect couldn't foresee. It's a sobering lesson in the limits of human ambition and the inherent unpredictability of the world stage. But don't hang up your historical hats just yet, because the story is far from over. We've only just scratched the surface of the tumultuous events that followed Pericles' death. The war would continue to twist and turn, with fortunes shifting as unpredictably as the Aegean winds. And while Pericles may have left the stage, the drama of the Peloponnesian War was far from its final act. So stay tuned, because what comes next is a tale of intrigue, betrayal, and the ultimate test of Athenian resilience. As the curtain rises on the final act of this historical drama, we're left to ponder what Pericles' legacy really means for Athens and for us. Ah, Pericles, the man, the myth, the marble statue. His story is a masterclass in both grandeur and folly, a cautionary tale wrapped in triumph. It's easy to get swept up in the romantic image of Pericles as the quintessential statesman who built a city of dreams out of stone and rhetoric. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a more complex picture, one that includes the cracks in the marble. Let's start by busting the myth of Pericles as the flawless architect of democracy. Sure, he championed the cause of the common Athenian, opening up political participation to the masses, or at least the male, landowning masses. But let's not kid ourselves. The Athenian democracy was a bit like a club with a selective guest list. Women, slaves, and non-citizens were left out in the cold, their voices as unheard as a whisper in the agora. So while Pericles expanded the democratic process, it was still a democracy with asterisks. He played the political game like a maestro, but the melody was far from inclusive. Economically, Pericles was nothing short of a visionary, transforming Athens into the cultural and financial capital of the Greek world. The city was awash with wealth, much of it flowing from the Delian League's coffers. This allowed for the construction of iconic structures like the Parthenon, turning Athens into a living museum. But this golden age was built on a shaky foundation. The funds that filled Athenian treasuries were often extracted from its allies, under the guise of mutual protection. It's the kind of arrangement that's less friends with benefits and more friends with obligations. Politically, Pericles' strategies were a double-edged sword. His focus on strengthening Athenian power set the city up for a spectacular rise, but also paved the way for its dramatic fall. His decision to relocate the Delian League treasury to Athens might have been a savvy power move at the time, but it sowed the seeds of resentment. The League's members were more like reluctant participants in a rigged game than willing allies. This discontent would eventually boil over, leading to revolts and contributing to Athens' eventual downfall. The higher you fly, the harder you crash into the Aegean, as they say. Pericles also left a complex social legacy. His reign was marked by a flourishing of arts, philosophy, and science, a veritable Greek Renaissance. Think of Athens during his leadership as the Silicon Valley of antiquity, but with more togas and fewer hoodies. Yet this cultural boom came with its own set of issues. The influx of wealth and the focus on luxury led to social stratification, with the gap between the rich and the poor widening like the Spartan chasm with Athens. The everyday Athenian, while enjoying the city's newfound glory, also had to navigate the challenges that came with economic disparity. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the Spartan phalanx in the Attic countryside. The Peloponnesian War was a calamity that Pericles might not have started directly, but his policies certainly set the stage for it. His strategy during the war, relying on the long walls and naval superiority, was a calculated risk that backfired spectacularly. The plague that ravaged Athens during the war was the ultimate irony, a grim twist of fate that no amount of strategic brilliance could have foreseen. It was a stark reminder that even the most meticulously laid plans can be undone by forces beyond human control. So, what do modern leaders learn from Pericles' story? First, the importance of adaptability. Pericles was a master strategist, but his rigidity in sticking to his plans, even as the situation deteriorated, proved costly. Flexibility in the face of changing circumstances is a lesson worth noting. Second, the perils of overextension. Pericles' ambition for Athenian hegemony was impressive, but it pushed the city to its limits, both economically and militarily. Expanding one's influence should never come at the expense of sustainability. And finally, the seductive danger of hubris. Pericles' belief in Athens' invincibility led to overconfidence, a common pitfall for leaders even today. His story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing one's own press releases, a timely reminder that the line between confidence and arrogance is thinner than a Corinthian column. As we wrap up this tale, it's clear that Pericles was a leader of immense talent and vision, but also a man bound by the limitations of his time and his humanity. His legacy is a mix of monumental achievements and costly missteps, a testament to both the heights of human ambition and its inevitable downfalls. In the end, Pericles reminds us that history is less about marble statues and more about the flesh and blood humans who shape it. And while the Parthenon may stand as a symbol of Athenian greatness, it also serves as a monument to the complexities and contradictions that define leadership and legacy alike. As we look to the future, let Pericles be both an inspiration and a warning, a figure as timeless as the city he helped build, and as human as the cracks that eventually brought it down. In the world of historical rock stars, Winston Churchill is the guy who crashed the party in a top hat and somehow made it work. His early years are a cocktail of privilege, misadventures, and enough ambition to power a small nation. You could say he was born with a silver spoon, but that would be selling him short. It was more like a whole silverware set. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill entered the world on November 30, 1874, at Blenheim Palace, a place that makes your average mansion look like a garden shed. As the son of Lord Randolph Churchill, a prominent conservative politician, and Jenny Jerome, an American socialite, Winston's upbringing was less Downton Abbey and more Richie Rich on steroids. Now, if you think being born into aristocracy means you automatically get straight A's, a perfect jawline, and a killer accent, think again. Young Winston was less of a prodigy and more of an enigma wrapped in a riddle with a C average. His school years at Harrow were a mixed bag. He struggled with subjects like Latin and Greek, and his teachers probably thought he had a better shot at becoming a circus performer than a statesman. But let's cut the guy some slack. His childhood was far from a picnic in Hyde Park. Churchill once famously quipped, "I am always ready to learn, although I do not always like being taught." A sentiment any student who's ever daydreamed through a history lecture can relate to. Despite his academic woes, Churchill had an ace up his sleeve, his flair for words. He wasn't just a kid who played with toy soldiers, he was the one scripting their Shakespearean monologues. His passion for writing and storytelling became his saving grace at Harrow, and it wasn't long before he made his mark as a budding orator. But before we get to the Churchill who rallied nations, let's talk about the Churchill who had a knack for getting into scrapes that would make Indiana Jones sweat. Fast forward to 1895, Winston is 21 and itching for adventure. He joins the 4th Hussars, a cavalry regiment where the uniforms are dapper, the moustaches are waxed, and the action is, well, mostly ceremonial. But Churchill wasn't one to sit around polishing his boots. So, he moonlights as a war correspondent, a job that let him trade horse riding for headline writing. His first gig? Covering the Cuban War of Independence. Picture this. A young Brit, sweltering in the Caribbean heat, trying to figure out why cigars and revolutions seem to go hand in hand here. His dispatches for the Daily Graphic were full of bravado, and he even managed to get shot at, an experience he wore like a badge of honor. Churchill had a taste for the dramatic, and nothing screams drama like the Boer War. In 1899, he somehow convinced himself, and a newspaper, that South Africa was the place to be. Once there, he didn't just report the war, he plunged right into the thick of it. His knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time, depending on your perspective, saw him captured by the Boers. Yes, our hero found himself in a POW camp, which, let's be honest, was probably not on his bucket list. But here's the kicker. Churchill decided that captivity was not his style. So, with the kind of audacity that would later define his political career, he made a daring escape. Picture a 25-year-old Winston scaling fences, dodging guards, and relying on the kindness of strangers to make his way to safety. He covered nearly 300 miles to reach Portuguese East Africa, all without the aid of Google Maps or a decent snack bar. His escape made headlines, and suddenly Churchill wasn't just the guy with a famous name, he was a bona fide hero. This escapade wasn't just a personal victory, it was the launch pad for his ambitious political persona. Churchill returned to Britain a household name, and with the kind of swagger that only comes from surviving a real-life jailbreak. He entered politics with the same gusto he applied to everything else in life, winning a seat in Parliament in 1900. His early career was a roller coaster of party-switching and headline-grabbing speeches. But one thing was clear, this was a man who thrived in the spotlight. Despite his aristocratic upbringing, Churchill's life was anything but predictable. He was a complex blend of privilege and perseverance, a man who turned every setback into a stepping stone. His early adventures shaped not just his career, but the indomitable spirit that would later inspire a nation through its darkest hours. So, next time you hear that gravelly voice or see his iconic V for Victory salute, remember the young Winston who escaped a POW camp with nothing but his wits and a good story. This was Churchill before the cigar, before the bulldog persona, crafting the legend, one escapade at a time. From daring escapes to parliamentary debates, Winston Churchill was a man who seemed to thrive on the chaos of life. Entering politics in 1900, Churchill was like a moth to the flame, only the flame was the flickering spotlight of public attention, and he had no intention of getting burned. His early political career was a veritable roller coaster ride, complete with sharp turns and unexpected loops. Let's dive into this political whirlwind. Churchill's political debut was on the Conservative ticket, a nod to his aristocratic lineage. But if you thought his political allegiance was set in stone, you'd be as wrong as a history book written in crayon. In 1904, in a move that would make even the most seasoned political strategists' heads spin, Churchill jumped ship to the Liberal Party. Why? Well, he had more in common with their progressive policies, and let's face it, Churchill was never one to shy away from making a scene. His switch was like swapping a comfortable chair for a seat on a rocket. A risk, sure, but with the potential for spectacular results. By 1908, Churchill was making waves as the president of the Board of Trade. This was no small feat. He was responsible for issues that affected the bread and butter of British households. His push for social reforms, like introducing unemployment insurance, was revolutionary. It was the early 20th century equivalent of giving your Wi-Fi password to a neighbor. Kind of a big deal. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. His ideas ruffled more than a few feathers, and his style was more bull in a china shop than gentle diplomat. As if switching parties wasn't enough drama, Churchill's political life reached a crescendo with the infamous Gallipoli campaign during World War I. Now, buckle up, because this is where things get really bumpy. As First Lord of the Admiralty, Churchill was one of the masterminds behind the 1915 Gallipoli operation, an ambitious plan to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. It was a grandiose scheme that seemed brilliant on paper, but was tragically flawed in execution. The idea was to open a new front and relieve pressure on the Western Front by forcing a passage through the Dardanelles. But here's the kicker. The operation was a logistical nightmare. Poor planning, inadequate intelligence, and fierce Turkish resistance turned what was supposed to be a swift victory into a prolonged quagmire. Over 250,000 Allied troops were killed or wounded, and the campaign dragged on for 8 brutal months. It was like trying to win a chess game with a deck of cards, impossible and downright embarrassing. Gallipoli wasn't just a military disaster, it was a personal and political catastrophe for Churchill. The press dubbed it Churchill's folly, and his career took a nosedive faster than a lead balloon. The political fallout was swift and severe, and Churchill found himself sidelined, his reputation in tatters. He resigned from the Admiralty and was, quite literally, sent to the trenches as a battalion commander on the Western Front. It was a humbling experience for a man who had once strutted through the corridors of power. Despite the debacle, Gallipoli was a turning point. Churchill learned his lessons the hard way, discovering the limits of both military might and political maneuvering. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, he would eventually claw his way back to prominence, but not without scars. The campaign's failure was a bitter pill to swallow. yet it also set the stage for his eventual redemption. Churchill's resilience in the face of adversity became a hallmark of his leadership, a testament to his tenacity. In a strange twist of fate, the very blunder that nearly derailed his career also prepared him for future challenges. He was a man who thrived in adversity, and the lessons from Gallipoli would serve him well in the years to come. Churchill's story is one of relentless ambition, marked by both spectacular triumphs and crushing defeats. His ability to rebound from failure was nothing short of legendary, and it was this indomitable spirit that would later inspire a nation in its darkest hour. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Churchill's journey was far from over, and the road to redemption was rocky, to say the least. His political career was a series of dramatic comebacks, each more improbable than the last. He was a man who refused to stay down, bouncing back with the kind of determination that makes Rocky Balboa look like a quitter. The allure of power, the thrill of the challenge, and the sheer force of his personality kept him in the game, even when the odds were stacked against him. Churchill's switch back to the Conservative Party in the 1920s was another twist in his tale, a move that would once again reshape his political destiny. It was as if he was saying, "I've tried the other side, and now I'm back to finish what I started." His return was met with skepticism by some, but Churchill was nothing if not persistent. He was like a boomerang. No matter how far you threw him away, he kept coming back. His ability to adapt and reinvent himself was unparalleled, a testament to his political savvy and enduring legacy. As we leave Churchill in the 1920s, navigating the political landscape with the finesse of a tightrope walker, it's clear that his story is far from finished. The stage is set for the next act in his life, one that would see him rise to unprecedented heights and face challenges that would test the very fabric of his character. The lessons of the past would guide him, but the future held new battles, both literal and metaphorical, that would define him as one of history's most resilient leaders. Stay tuned, because the Churchill saga is just heating up, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And so, as Churchill navigated the political landscape of the 1920s with the finesse of a tightrope walker, the 1930s dawned with a different kind of challenge, a decade often referred to as his wilderness years. Picture this, Churchill, the political wonderkind turned seasoned statesman, suddenly finds himself on the outskirts of power, peering in through the window like a kid not invited to the party. But don't feel too sorry for him. This was a man who knew how to turn isolation into opportunity. The 1930s were a period of introspection and creativity for Churchill. Stripped of political influence, he turned to painting and writing activities that were more than just hobbies. They were lifelines. His paintings, often vibrant landscapes, were a canvas for his restless spirit. As for writing, well, Churchill churned out words like a factory on overtime, producing volumes on history and politics that would later win him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. Yes, you heard that right, a Nobel laureate in literature. Take that, Hemingway. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic image of Churchill, the isolated artist. These were also years of financial strain. Despite his aristocratic roots, Churchill wasn't exactly swimming in a Scrooge McDuck vault of gold coins. His lifestyle had a price tag that could rival a small nation's GDP, and his penchant for luxury was notorious. By the mid-1930s, he was earning $10,000 a year from his writing, about $700,000 today. But this was often just enough to keep creditors at bay. Perhaps the most British of all problems, living beyond one's means while sipping champagne. Yet, while Churchill was painting and penning his way through the decade, the world outside was changing, and not for the better. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany was a dark cloud gathering on the horizon. Churchill, ever the keen observer of political climates, saw the storm coming long before many of his contemporaries did. His warnings about the Nazi threat were as persistent as a dripping tap, and just as ignored. He delivered speeches in the House of Commons that were as fiery as they were prophetic, urging Britain to rearm in preparation for what he saw as inevitable conflict. Now, you might ask, why was Churchill so often dismissed during these years? Well, let's just say his reputation was a bit like a vintage car, impressive on paper, but prone to backfiring at the most inconvenient times. His track record was marred by the shadow of Gallipoli and perceived as too hawkish for a Britain still nursing its wounds from World War I. The political establishment was wary of his calls for rearmament, preferring a policy of appeasement that was cheaper and, in their eyes, less likely to lead to another bloodbath. Churchill's political isolation allowed him to become a bit of a Cassandra warning of doom, but rarely believed. His speeches often cut through the complacency of the era, such as his 1934 proclamation that Germany is arming fast and no one will stop her. He was like that friend who insists on carrying an umbrella on a sunny day, only to be vindicated when the skies open up. And yet, despite his prescience, his warnings fell on deaf ears, as if the British government had collectively decided to stick their fingers in their ears and hum loudly until the problem went away. But here's where things get interesting. Churchill's return to power wasn't just about being right at the right time, it was about a shifting political tide that he expertly rode back into relevance. By the late 1930s, the appeasement policies of Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain were starting to look less like clever diplomacy and more like wishful thinking. The Munich Agreement of 1938, which allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, was sold to the British public as peace for our time. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. As Europe teetered on the brink of war, the British public, and indeed its politicians, started to realize that maybe Churchill's umbrella was more necessity than paranoia. The timing of his return was as much about the failures of others as it was about his own capabilities. When Chamberlain's appeasement policy finally crumbled under the weight of its own inadequacies, Churchill was there, waiting in the wings like an understudy ready to take the stage. So, was Churchill's return to power a matter of talent or timing? In truth, it was a cocktail of both, shaken with a twist of historical necessity. His unyielding stance on rearmament and his stark warnings about the rise of Nazi Germany had finally caught up with a world that could no longer afford to ignore them. When he became Prime Minister in 1940, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a validation of the long, lonely years spent in political exile. Churchill's wilderness years weren't just a hiatus from power, they were a crucible that forged the leader who would steer Britain through its darkest days. His resilience, honed through years of political isolation and financial strain, became the backbone of his wartime leadership. But let's not wrap this up in a tidy bow just yet. The stage is set for Churchill's most defining chapter, where his indomitable spirit would not only inspire a nation, but also redefine what leadership in times of crisis truly means. So, as we leave Churchill on the cusp of his return to power, remember that his story is far from over. The wilderness years were but a prelude to the epic saga that would unfold as the world plunged into the chaos of World War II, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this tale of resilience and redemption continues. Stay tuned, because the Churchill you think you know is just getting started. As Churchill stepped into the breach as Prime Minister in May 1940, the world was on fire, and he was handed a bucket with more holes than a slice of Swiss cheese. The Dunkirk evacuation was underway, and Britain was staring down the barrel of potential defeat. But if history teaches us anything, it's that Winston Churchill had a knack for turning disaster into drama with a capital D, and boy, did he deliver. Churchill's leadership during World War II was anything but a smooth sail on the Thames. It was more akin to navigating the rapids of the Amazon in a leaky canoe. His speeches were the stuff of legend, of course. Take the famous "We shall fight on the beaches" speech, delivered on June 4, 1940. It was a rousing call to arms, a verbal Red Bull for a nation running on fumes. Yet, behind every stirring proclamation was a man battling his own uncertainties, a fact often glossed over by the myth-makers. Let's pull back the curtain on one of his most famous speeches. When Churchill declared, "We shall never surrender," it wasn't just bravado, it was a calculated gamble, a verbal poker game where he was betting the house on Britain's resilience. The truth was that Britain was teetering on the brink. The Luftwaffe had the Royal Air Force in its sights, and resources were thinner than a politician's promise. But Churchill knew the power of words. He knew that to keep the nation in the fight, he had to win hearts before he could win battles. Of course, Churchill's speeches weren't just about rallying the public, they were about sending a message to friends and foes alike. They were like a lighthouse in the storm, signalling to the world, "We're still here, and we're not going quietly." The myth of the infallible leader, however, often skips over his moments of doubt. Behind closed doors, Churchill was a man wrestling with the weight of the world, his private moments a stark contrast to his public persona. He questioned his own decisions, fretted over strategies, and knew that each choice carried the potential for catastrophe. Now, let's talk strategy. The Battle of Britain was Churchill's first big test. With the Luftwaffe looming, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Churchill, ever the gambler, put his faith in the RAF, a move that was as much about necessity as it was about strategy. The British economy was stretched to its limits, producing aircraft at a pace that would make a sweatshop blush. In 1940 alone, the UK produced over 15,000 aircraft, an industrial feat that kept the skies filled and Hitler's dreams of invasion grounded. Yet, the myth of the flawless wartime leader takes a hit when you examine Churchill's strategic blunders. The Norwegian campaign in 1940 was a prime example. It was supposed to be a quick and decisive operation to secure iron ore supplies and prevent a German foothold in Scandinavia. Instead, it turned into a logistical nightmare, with British forces retreating in disarray. This debacle didn't just dent Churchill's military reputation, it also exposed the brittle underbelly of British planning. Despite these stumbles, Churchill's ability to inspire remained his ace in the hole. He had a way of framing adversity as opportunity, a perspective that turned even the direst situations into potential victories. When the Blitz rained down on London, Churchill's visits to bombed-out neighbourhoods were more than just photo ops. They were morale missions, proof that he was as committed to the fight as the people enduring it. Churchill's wartime leadership was a study in contrasts. His strategic decisions were a mix of brilliance and blunder, his public confidence a mask for private turmoil. He was a man who understood the power of narrative, crafting a story of resilience that resonated far beyond Britain's shores. The special relationship with the United States was as much about shared values as it was about survival. Churchill's transatlantic courtship of Franklin D. Roosevelt was part bromance, part survival strategy. The Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which provided critical military aid to Britain, was a testament to his diplomatic finesse, though it came at the price of significant post-war debt. But let's not forget the elephant in the room, Churchill's relationship with Stalin. It was as frosty as a Siberian winter, yet crucial for the Allied war effort. The Tehran Conference in 1943, where Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin met to strategize, was a diplomatic juggling act. Churchill had to balance British interests with the demands of an unpredictable ally, a task akin to herding cats in a thunderstorm. While Churchill's speeches and strategic maneuvers are often spotlighted, his wartime leadership was also about managing the home front. Rationing, blackouts, and the constant threat of invasion were daily realities for British citizens. Churchill's challenge was to maintain civilian morale while stretching resources thinner than a slice of toast. It was a delicate dance, one that required both political savvy and a healthy dose of charisma. Now, let's take a moment to debunk a particularly persistent myth, Churchill as the lone saviour of Britain. While his leadership was pivotal, he was not a one-man band. The unsung heroes of the war were the countless Britons who kept the country running. Factory workers, code breakers at Bletchley Park, and even the Home Guard, who, despite being armed with little more than broomsticks at times, stood ready to defend their homeland. Churchill's genius lay in harnessing this collective spirit, channeling it into a force that would eventually turn the tide of war. As the war dragged on, Churchill's leadership faced new tests. The D-Day landings in June 1944 were a logistical leviathan involving over 156,000 Allied troops storming the beaches of Normandy. Churchill's role was both as strategist and symbol, a leader who embodied the indomitable spirit of a nation determined to reclaim its place in the world. Yet even as the Allies gained ground, Churchill remained acutely aware of the fragile nature of victory. The war in Europe was not just a military campaign, it was a battle for the future, a fight to prevent the mistakes of the past from repeating themselves. Churchill's wartime leadership was a high-wire act, a delicate balance of courage and caution, inspiration and introspection. He was a man who thrived in the crucible of conflict, yet his legacy is often shrouded in the fog of myth. The reality was far more nuanced, a leader who made mistakes but learned from them, who inspired a nation while grappling with his own doubts. As the war drew to a close, Churchill's focus shifted from winning battles to winning the peace, a challenge that would test his leadership in new and unexpected ways. So, as we close this chapter on Churchill's wartime leadership, let's remember that the legend of the infallible leader is just that, a legend. The real Churchill was a man of contradictions, a leader whose greatest triumphs were tempered by his failures. His story is one of resilience and redemption, a testament to the power of words, the weight of decisions, and the indomitable spirit of a nation forged in the fires of war. Stay tuned, because this saga of grit and glory is far from over. As the dust of World War II began to settle, one might think Churchill would take a well-deserved breather. But, like a moth drawn to the flame of political clout, he was far from ready to retire his rhetorical boxing gloves. Churchill, now a septuagenarian with the energy of a man half his age, found himself at a crossroads. The war had been won, but the peace was proving to be a different kind of battlefield. Into the post-war years, a period where Churchill's indomitable spirit would once again be tested, this time against the tides of change and the shifting sands of global power. The 1945 general election was a seismic shock to the Churchillian system. After serving as the face of wartime resolve, Churchill faced a public that was ready for peacetime reform and a social safety net, not just stirring speeches. In what felt like political whiplash, the Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee, unseated Churchill's Conservative Party with a landslide victory, securing 393 seats to the Conservatives' 197 Bash. It was as if the nation had thanked him for the wartime ride, then promptly asked him to get off the bus. The voters, invigorated by the promise of a welfare state, chose Attlee's vision of nationalisation and social welfare, a testament to the power of pocketbook issues over patriotic nostalgia. Churchill, unceremoniously ousted, retreated to the role of leader of the opposition, an unfamiliar position for a man accustomed to the front lines of power. Yet, like a political Rocky Balboa, he wasn't one to stay down. He took this time to hone his oratorical skills and keep a watchful eye on the evolving geopolitical landscape. Cue the emergence of the Cold War, a period that would see Churchill's rhetorical prowess once again take center stage. It was in Fulton, Missouri in 1946 that Churchill delivered his famous Iron Curtain speech, a phrase that would come to define the ideological divide between East and West. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent, he declared, painting a vivid picture of a Europe split by the iron grip of Soviet influence. This speech wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a clarion call to the Western powers to recognize the Soviet Union's expanding influence as a looming threat. Churchill's vision was that of a unified Europe, one fortified against the encroachment of communism. He advocated for the strength of Anglo-American cooperation, a partnership he saw as essential to countering Soviet expansionism. While the speech was initially met with mixed reactions, some saw it as alarmist, others as prophetic. It ultimately cemented Churchill's legacy as a shrewd observer of international affairs and a master of the geopolitical soundbite. Fast forward to the 1951 general election, and Churchill was back in business, reclaiming the prime ministership at the age of 76. It was a comeback worthy of a Hollywood script, yet his second term was more a study in the art of statesmanship than in the bold leadership of yesteryear. The world had changed, and so had Churchill. His focus shifted from wartime heroics to the complexities of post-war recovery. The British economy was still reeling, rationing was a daily reality, and the nation was grappling with the loss of its empire, hardly the glamorous backdrop for a political swan song. Churchill's second stint as Prime Minister was marked by an emphasis on foreign policy and an attempt to navigate the turbulent waters of decolonisation. He was, however, less enthusiastic about domestic reforms, leaving much of the day-to-day governance to his deputies. Critics argue that his leadership during this period was characterised by a sense of nostalgia for Britain's imperial past, a reluctance to fully embrace the winds of change sweeping across the globe. Yet, even in his twilight years, Churchill's influence on the global stage remained significant. His push for European unity, though not without its contradictions, laid the groundwork for what would later become the European Union, a testament to his enduring vision for a peaceful and united continent. Churchill's legacy, however, is a tapestry of triumphs and controversies. While he's often lionized for his wartime leadership, his peacetime policies and views on colonialism and race have sparked considerable debate. His response to the 1943 Bengal famine, where millions perished due to food shortages exacerbated by wartime policies, remains a particularly contentious aspect of his legacy. Critics argue that his decisions, influenced by imperial priorities, contributed to the severity of the crisis. A stark reminder that even giants of history cast long shadows. Yet, for all the criticisms, Churchill's ability to rally a nation during its darkest hours remains an indelible part of his story. His speeches, dripping with determination and defiance, have become the stuff of legend, a reminder of the power of words in shaping history. His resilience in the face of adversity and his unwavering belief in the strength of democratic values continue to inspire leaders and laymen alike. In the annals of history, Churchill is both hero and human, a man whose complexities defy easy categorization. As we reflect on Churchill's legacy, it's clear that his leadership style, equal parts charisma and controversy, still sparks debate today. In an era where political discourse often gravitates towards the extremes, Churchill's pragmatic approach to leadership serves as a reminder of the power of balance and compromise. His ability to adapt, to rise from the ashes of defeat, and to navigate the tumultuous tides of change is a masterclass in resilience. So, what do we make of Winston Churchill? A man whose life story reads like a historical epic. Perhaps it's best to view him as a man of his time, flawed yet formidable, whose impact on the world stage was as profound as it was polarizing. In the end, Churchill's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of leadership, a reminder that while history is often written by the victors, it is shaped by the visionaries who dare to think beyond the confines of their time. As we close this chapter on Churchill, let's remember that history, much like the man himself, is a tapestry of complexities, woven together by the threads of triumph and trial, brilliance and blunder. In the vast rugged terrain of the Andes, the Incas weren't just gazing at their llamas, they were gazing at the stars. Now, hold on to your space helmets, because we're diving into a world where astronomy wasn't just for nerds with telescopes, but a cornerstone of empire building. The Inca Empire, sprawling across modern-day Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia and beyond, was like the NASA of the 15th century. They had an astronomical game plan that would make today's astrophysicists do a double-take, all without the aid of a single telescope or even a dash of Wi-Fi. First up, let's talk about quipus. No, that's not a typo or the latest tech gadget, it's the Incas' version of a cosmic spreadsheet. A quipu was essentially a series of coloured, knotted strings that recorded data and events. Think of it as Excel for the ancient world, minus the soul-crushing frustration of spreadsheet errors. These quipus weren't just decorative, they were critical tools for mapping out celestial events. The knots and colours encoded information about time and space, transforming string into a storytelling medium that tracked everything from tax records to astronomical phenomena. Imagine trying to balance your checkbook and predict a solar eclipse with the same tool. Welcome to the Incan world. The Incas elevated stargazing to an art form, intertwining it with their agricultural and ceremonial life. The Milky Way, or Mayu as they called it, wasn't just a pretty sprinkle of stars across the night sky, it was a celestial calendar. The shimmering galactic river guided their agricultural cycles and religious festivals with a precision that would make an atomic clock envious. The Incas observed the positions of stars and constellations to decide the best times for planting and harvesting, effectively letting the cosmos dictate their agricultural schedule. Talk about cosmic farming advice. Without access to modern technology, the Incas relied on their keen observation skills. They didn't have the Hubble to marvel at distant galaxies, but they did have something equally impressive, a network of observatories called Intihuatanas. These were stone structures that functioned as solar clocks and astronomical calendars. The most famous, perched on the breathtaking heights of Machu Picchu, was essentially a sundial on steroids. The Incas used these structures to mark solstices and equinoxes, ensuring their religious ceremonies were cosmically aligned. Just imagine a priest solemnly announcing, "The sun has spoken," to kick off a festival. Now, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the llama in the room. How on earth did they manage all this without modern technology? In a world where we use GPS to find the nearest coffee shop, the Incas navigated the heavens with nothing more than their eyes and some ingenious stonework. It's like winning a Formula One race with a horse-drawn carriage, an incredible feat of intelligence and resourcefulness. Their fascination with the stars wasn't just about practicalities like planting crops, it was deeply spiritual. The Incas believed the sky was a mirror of the earth, a cosmic reflection of their terrestrial existence. This worldview infused their entire culture, from the grand architecture of Cusco to their intricate textiles. The stars were woven into the very fabric of Incan identity, guiding both their spiritual and day-to-day lives. Let's not forget the role of mythology in all this stargazing. The Incas didn't just see stars, they saw animals and deities. The dark constellations of the Milky Way, known as Yanafoyu, were as important as the bright stars themselves. Observing the movement of these shadowy forms, including the famous llama and serpent, helped the Incas predict rainfall and seasonal changes. It's like looking at a Rorschach test in the night sky and getting meteorological data instead of a psychological profile. And just to add a little spice to the cosmic soup, the Incas used astronomy to reinforce their political power. By aligning themselves with the celestial order, the Sapa Inca, or emperor, wasn't just a ruler, he was a divine figure, the earthly embodiment of the sun god Inti. This divine right to rule was written in the stars, literally. The Incas turned the cosmos into a political ally, a strategy that would make Machiavelli proud. So, what's the takeaway from all this celestial shenanigans? The Incas were proof that you don't need the latest tech to reach for the stars, just a bit of string, some stones, and a whole lot of creativity. They created a society where astronomy and everyday life were as intertwined as the knots of a quipu, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and baffle us today. And while we might chuckle at the idea of a cosmic calendar made of strings and stones, the Incas remind us that sometimes the best tools are the simplest ones, even if they won't fit in your pocket. And speaking of cosmic calendars, let's turn our gaze to the Incas' sun-worshipping extravaganza, where the celestial spotlight was firmly on Inti, the sun god. This wasn't just a casual nod to the sun like we give to our morning coffee. This was a full-blown, sun-centric worldview. Inti wasn't just the big boss in the sky, he was the ultimate rock star, the cosmic powerhouse that made everything tick. Imagine a deity so crucial that the entire empire revolved around him, literally. The Sapa Inca, as Inti's earthly representative, was like a solar-powered CEO whose legitimacy was as bright as a midday sun. The Incas' architectural feats were nothing short of a cosmic ballet, with structures like Machu Picchu and the Coricancha temple designed to celebrate Inti's magnificence. Machu Picchu, perched 2,430 meters above sea level, wasn't just a getaway for Incan royalty, it was an astronomical observatory par excellence. Here, the sun would align with the Intihuatana stone. Think of it as an ancient astronomical GPS. This stone was so precisely positioned that during the winter solstice, the sun would sit directly above it, casting no shadow. It's as if the Incas managed to convince the sun to perform a little dance routine just for them. Then there's the Coricancha, or the Temple of the Sun, in Cusco. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill temple, it was the Vatican of Incan civilization, a glittering homage to Inti that would make any sun god blush. The walls, once covered in sheets of gold, captured the sunlight in a way that could only be described as blindingly divine. The temple was aligned with astronomical precision, its architecture a testament to the Incas' mastery over stone. Forget about your modern-day laser levels. These guys had stones that fit together so tightly you couldn't slide a postcard between them. It's like the Incas hired a cosmic interior decorator to make sure everything was perfectly aligned with the heavens. Of course, all this celestial alignment wasn't just for show. The Incas believed that by aligning their architecture with celestial events, they were ensuring the gods' favor. An ancient insurance policy, if you will. But let's not get too carried away with the myth of Inca perfection. For all their solar savvy, the Incas sometimes dropped the ball when it came to predicting eclipses. Sure, they could tell you when the sun was going to rise and set, but when the moon decided to photobomb the sun, well, things got a bit hazy. It's like having a perfect track record in a game, until a newbie shows up and throws everyone off. Now, if you're wondering why the Incas were so obsessed with the sun, think of it this way. In a world without electric light, the sun was the ultimate life-giver. It dictated everything from crop cycles to social hierarchies. The sun was the original influencer, and Inti was the god you wanted to keep happy. The Incas' solar worship wasn't just religious fervor, it was a pragmatic response to the harsh realities of Andean life. Without the sun, there were no crops. Without crops, there was no empire. Economically speaking, Solar worship was as much about power dynamics as it was about spirituality. The Sapa Incas' claim to power was quite literally written in the stars, or rather, in the sun's rays. By claiming descent from Inti, the ruling class solidified their divine right to rule. It was a strategy that ensured political stability, with the sun serving as both symbol and guarantor of their authority. The Incas effectively turned celestial phenomena into political capital, a move that would make even the shrewdest modern politician envious. But let's not forget that for all their astronomical acumen, the Incas were human, and humans are nothing if not imperfect. The occasional eclipse prediction misfire wasn't just a moment of celestial mystery. It was a reminder that the cosmos is a vast, unpredictable place. The Incas' stargazing might have been state-of-the-art for their time, but even they couldn't master the universe entirely. And isn't that just the human condition? We reach for the stars, but sometimes we miss and end up with a handful of moondust instead. So, the next time you marvel at the architectural wonders of Machu Picchu or the golden glow of the Coricancha, remember that while the Incas may have had their heads in the stars, their feet were firmly planted on the ground. Their solar worship wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment, it was a savvy blend of faith, politics, and economics, a trifecta that powered an entire empire. And while the myth of Inca perfection might be tempting, the reality is far more fascinating. A society that embraced the cosmos, celebrated the sun, and occasionally tripped over a lunar eclipse, but never stopped reaching for the sky. It's a story that continues to shine, much like Inti himself, illuminating the remarkable intersection of faith and science in one of history's greatest civilizations. And while the Incas might not have had all the answers, they certainly knew how to ask the right questions using the universe as their guide. Their legacy is a reminder that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in the perfection of our predictions, but in the wonder of our continual quest for understanding. And speaking of a continual quest for understanding, let's dive into the Incas' political chess game, where the stars weren't just for romantic evenings. Oh no, they were tools of power and control. Imagine this, the Sapa Inca, high on his throne, not just an emperor, but a celestial maestro, orchestrating his empire with a cosmic baton. Every celestial event was a potential ace up his sleeve, a performance to dazzle the masses or intimidate potential rebels. When a solar eclipse occurred, it wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a divine spectacle, a celestial endorsement of the Sapa Inca's rule. Picture him pointing to the sky, saying, "See? Even the sun agrees with me." Now, let's not pretend this was all rainbows and solar flares. The political spin was as much about maintaining power as it was about cosmic awe. The Incas had an ingenious way of using celestial events to reinforce their authority. If the sun god Inti happened to dim the lights during an eclipse, it was spun as the gods demanding obedience from the people. And if you think this sounds like ancient propaganda, you're absolutely right. The celestial events were used as PR stunts, akin to a modern politician's social media blitz during an election cycle. The Incas knew that a little divine intervention, or at least the appearance of it, went a long way in controlling the narrative. But celestial alignment wasn't the only trick up the Incas' sleeve. They were also masters of strategic alliances through marriage, a practice as old as time and as cutthroat as Game of Thrones. The Sapa Inca didn't just marry anyone, he chose from the nobility, creating a web of alliances that helped keep the empire together. This wasn't about romance, it was a calculated political move. By marrying into various noble families, the Sapa Inca ensured loyalty and quashed potential uprisings before they even began. It's like office politics on steroids, where instead of a promotion, you get a powerful ally, or in some cases, an entire army. And let's talk numbers, because we love numbers. The Inca Empire stretched over 2,500 miles, encompassing millions of people from diverse cultures and languages. Managing such a vast territory required more than just celestial theatrics and a few well-placed marriages. It was a logistical nightmare, akin to herding cats across a continent. The Incas used a network of roads, over 25,000 miles of them, a feat of engineering genius that rivals today's interstate highways. These roads connected the empire, allowing for efficient communication, troop movement, and the distribution of resources. It's like the internet of the ancient world, but with llamas instead of fiber optics. But let's not get too starry-eyed about Inca efficiency. For all their celestial savvy and political prowess, they weren't omniscient. There were cracks in the armor, and the occasional miscalculation could lead to chaos. Take, for example, their failure to predict the Spanish conquest. The Incas, with all their celestial alignments and divine endorsements, didn't see the European storm cloud gathering on the horizon. When Francisco Pizarro and his merry band of conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, the Incas were caught off guard. It's a sobering reminder that even the most powerful empires can overlook the obvious when they're too busy looking up. And speaking of gaps, let's bust a myth or two. The Incas weren't infallible astronomers. Their celestial calculations were impressive, sure, but they weren't running NASA. They missed eclipses, misjudged the timing of some celestial events, and sometimes, just sometimes, they got it wrong. Their understanding of the cosmos was remarkable for their time, but it wasn't perfect. They were human, after all, brilliant, ambitious, but prone to error. So, why does this matter? Because it paints a more complex picture of the Incas, one that goes beyond the romanticized notion of an empire in perfect harmony with the stars. The reality is far messier and more fascinating. It's a story of power plays and political maneuvering, where the stars were as much a tool of governance as they were objects of wonder. The Incas remind us that history is not just a narrative of triumphs and accomplishments. It's also a tale of missteps and miscalculations, of human ambition clashing with the unpredictable nature of the universe. In short, the Incas were as much about the grit as they were about the glory. Their empire was a tapestry woven with both celestial threads and earthly struggles, a reminder that even the most sophisticated civilizations are a blend of brilliance and blunder. And while we may marvel at their achievements, let's not forget the human stories behind the stones and stars, stories of ambition and adversity, of politics and power, of a people who reach for the heavens even as they grappled with the realities of earth. And speaking of grappling with reality, let's unravel how the Incas intertwined their celestial savvy with the nitty-gritty of daily life. You see, in the highlands of the Andes, where weather forecasts were about as reliable as a chocolate teapot in the sun, the Incas had to get creative. They turned to their celestial calendar, an intricate web of starry wisdom, to manage everything from agriculture to religious festivals. Now, if you think your Google Calendar is impressive, you might want to sit down for this. The Incas didn't just plant crops willy-nilly. Oh no, they orchestrated their agriculture with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. Their celestial calendar was akin to a cosmic almanac, dictating the when and where of planting and harvesting. This was agriculture on a grand scale, folks. We're talking about feeding an empire that stretched over 2,500 miles, from the coastal deserts to the lush valleys. It's no small feat to keep millions fed, especially when you're dealing with microclimates that could switch seasons faster than a Netflix binge. The Incas relied on the positions of stars and constellations to determine the optimal times for sowing seeds and reaping harvests. Their observatories, those stone masterpieces like the Intihuatanas, served as agricultural advisors. Forget about your local farmer's almanac. The Incas had the cosmos as their guide. They observed the Pleiades, for instance, to predict rainfall. If these seven sisters appeared bright and clear in the sky, it was a green light for planting. If they were dim or obscured, it meant drought was lurking around the corner, and it was time to hold off on the planting party. Now, let's sprinkle in some economic spice, because what's a story about an empire without some fiscal flair? The Incas' agricultural prowess wasn't just about survival, it was a cornerstone of their economy. Their ability to predict and maximize crop yields ensured that their granaries were always stocked, a crucial buffer against famine. It wasn't just about having enough quinoa and potatoes to go around, it was about power, stability, and control. By maintaining a stable food supply, the Inca rulers could ensure loyalty among their subjects. After all, a full belly makes for a happy citizenry, or at least a more compliant one. And speaking of compliance, let's not gloss over the social side of things. The Incas' celestial calendar was also a social planner of sorts, dictating the timing of festivals and religious ceremonies. These events were the social glue of the empire, an opportunity to reinforce social hierarchies and religious devotion. Imagine a society where the calendar wasn't just a tool for marking time, but a sacred script that dictated the rhythm of life. One of the most extravagant festivals was Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun, which was essentially a sun-worshipping extravaganza held in June. Picture this: Cusco, the heart of the empire, transformed into a vibrant stage where thousands gathered to honor Inti, the sun god. The Sapa Inca, decked out in golden regalia that would make a Grammy winner blush, led the festivities. This wasn't just a party, it was a display of cosmic allegiance and imperial power. Rituals included offerings of corn, chicha, that's beer to you and me, and even sacrifices, though we'll skip the gory details. The festival culminated in a grand procession, a dazzling spectacle that reinforced the divine right of the Sapa Inca to rule. But let's not get too swept away in the romance of it all. While these festivals were indeed vibrant and colourful, they were also strategic events. They served as a reminder of the social hierarchy, with the Sapa Inca at the top, basking in divine favour. It was a clever way to keep the populace in line, using the allure of celestial events to bolster earthly power. The festivals were a reminder that while the stars might guide the Incas, it was the rulers who wielded them to keep the cosmic and social order intact. And here's where the myth-busting comes in, because we love to peel back the curtain. While the Incas' celestial calendar was undoubtedly a sophisticated tool, it wasn't infallible. There were times when the stars didn't align as expected and the crops suffered. It's a reminder that even the most impressive systems can falter, especially when you're dealing with the unpredictable forces of nature. But rather than seeing these setbacks as failures, the Incas viewed them as opportunities for adaptation and resilience. It's a testament to their ingenuity that they managed to sustain such a vast empire despite the occasional cosmic curveball. So what does this all mean for us, modern-day stargazers and calendar keepers? It's a reminder that our ancestors were no strangers to the complexities of life. They balanced the cosmic and the practical, the divine and the mundane, crafting a society where astronomy wasn't just about understanding the universe, it was about shaping the world they lived in. The Incas remind us that while we may have traded quippers for spreadsheets and stone observatories for satellite dishes, the underlying quest for understanding and harnessing the universe's power remains unchanged. And while the Incas might not have cracked all the cosmic codes, their legacy is a shining example of how human curiosity and creativity can turn the night sky into a map, a calendar, and even a tool of power. So the next time you look up at the stars, remember that they're not just distant lights in the sky. They're part of a story that's been unfolding for millennia, a story that continues to inspire, mystify, and illuminate the human experience. So, as we look up at the stars tonight, we can't help but marvel at the Incas' audacious attempts to map out not just the heavens, but the very rhythms of their lives. But let's step back for a moment and consider, were the Incas truly the infallible sky-gazers we've been led to believe, or is there a touch of stardust in our eyes that needs clearing? Now, don't get me wrong. The Incas were astoundingly advanced for their time. Their quippers and intihuatanas were like cosmic cheat sheets, and their ability to sync their agricultural cycles with celestial movements was nothing short of genius. We're talking about a civilization that could predict the best time to plant corn by the stars, without needing a single weather app. That's impressive, even by today's standards. But did they occasionally get it wrong? Absolutely. While they could track solstices and equinoxes with precision, eclipses sometimes caught them off guard, like an unexpected plot twist in a season finale. They were experts at reading the sky, yet even experts can have an off day. It's akin to the top chef who occasionally burns the toast, still a culinary genius, just human after all. And let's not forget, their celestial prowess was sometimes interwoven with a bit of good old-fashioned political theatre. The Sapa Inca's divine right to rule was written in the stars, or so they said. But a healthy dose of skepticism is warranted here. In reality, political power often required more than just cosmic endorsement. It was about strategic marriages, military might, and yes, occasional PR spin. The stars might have shone brightly on the Sapa Inca, but it was his savvy maneuvers on Earth that kept him in power. Fast forward to today, and the legacy of Incan astronomy still twinkles in modern Andean culture. Festivals like Inti Raymi are still celebrated, a nod to their sun-worshipping past. And their architectural wonders, like Machu Picchu, continue to draw awe from around the globe, not just for their beauty, but for their celestial alignment. The Incas' cosmic calendar may have evolved, but its influence lingers, a reminder that the stars have always been more than just distant balls of gas. So, what's the moral of this starry tale? The Incas remind us that human ingenuity is as boundless as the universe itself, but it's also as fallible. They reached for the stars, sometimes grasping them, sometimes not. In their quest to understand the cosmos, they left us a legacy that blends astronomical prowess with practical life lessons, a reminder that even the grandest empires have their limits. As we wrap up our celestial journey, remember this. The stars have always been a canvas for our dreams and ambitions, a cosmic stage for humanity's greatest triumphs and occasional blunders. The Incas may have been exceptional stargazers, but they were also dreamers, much like us. They remind us that while we may never fully understand the universe, the pursuit of that knowledge is what makes us truly human. So, as you gaze up at the night sky, consider the Incas, a civilization that dared to let the stars guide them. Their story is a testament to the power of human curiosity and the timeless allure of the celestial dance above. Because at the end of the day, whether we're using Quipus or quantum computers, we're all just trying to find our place in the universe. And that, my friends, is a journey as infinite as the stars themselves.